ASEAN Outlook on the Indo-Pacific. This is a flagship event organized by Indonesia as a part of its ASEAN chairmanship in 2023. The forum serves as an inclusive platform for ASEAN member states and partners from public and private sectors to engage in constructive discussion, identify potential tangible projects, and promote collaboration in the Indo-Pacific. There will be three sub-themes that will be discussed in this forum. First one will be green infrastructure and resilient supply chain. The second one will be sustainable and innovative financing. And our third, digital transformation and creative economy. Excellencies, distinguished delegates, ladies and gentlemen, we will have a briefer session that will be delivered by the Assistant Director of Analysis and Monitoring on Finance and Socioeconomic Issues Division on the ASEAN Secretariat, with the main topic, ASEAN Pathway to Carbon Neutral. Without further ado, please welcome Ms. Latifa Haida Abdul Latif.
Thank you very much. Can you hear me? Okay, thank you very much, Madam
Germany, and good morning, everyone. It's such a pleasure to be here this morning, and I wish that I could be able to share some insights and a quick introduction to ASEAN's pathway towards carbon neutrality.
So on Sunday last week, ASEAN adopted the strategy for carbon neutrality, which marked the beginning of an exciting and critical pathway for the region's journey towards carbon neutral future. Why I say it's exciting? Because the region's transition towards carbon neutrality is expected to unlock tremendous economic benefits for the region. Based on our estimation, green transition, if I can have the next slide, please.
Based on our estimation, in coming up or in developing the strategy, the transition would add up to $1 trillion to ASEAN GDP and bring in up to $1 trillion of green investment to the region, and it can create up to 12 million jobs by 2030. And if we extend the projection to 2050, the number will be even more impressive, as it will add up to 5.3 trillion value add to ASEAN's economy, bring in 6.7 trillion of green investments to the region, and creates up to 66 million jobs for the ASEAN's citizens by 2050. And why I say it's critical, because not only it provides a structured pathway for ASEAN to move towards carbon neutrality and address climate crisis, but it will also shape the region's future development and ensure ASEAN remain competitive on the global stage. So as you can see on the slides up there on the screen, there are 8 strategies that have been developed to help address decarbonization challenges and accelerate the region's transitions to a carbon neutral future. The 4 strategies that you see at the top are the strategies that will drive economic growth for the region. This will be done by accelerating green value chain integration, creating regional circular economy supply chain, connecting green infrastructure and market, and developing interoperable carbon market, not only for the region, but also globally. And the 4 strategies that has been developed that you see at the root of the tree are the fundamental structure that needs to be in place for ASEAN to make the leap towards carbon neutral future. The first one is, if you can see the strategy number 5, is through credible and common standards, by attracting and deploying green capital, by creating an ecosystem that fosters green development, green talent development, and not just developing green talent development, but also mobility of these talents across the region, and by sharing green best practices. Next slide. So implementation of the strategy must be decisive, practical, and impactful. And for this, 16 initiatives have been identified to kickstart ASEAN's journey towards carbon neutrality. You will be able to look at these 16 initiatives on our website, and I encourage you to do so. The strategies has been designed to complement each ASEAN member state's national decarbonization policy, and through the strategy, ASEAN will be able to benefit from regional complementarity, create economies of scale for decarbonization solution, promote sustainable growth, and chart the opportunities for a more ambitious pathway for the region. Ladies and gentlemen, ASEAN has a real leadership opportunity to set an example to other regions in the world on taking collective actions to address decarbonization. And the time to act is now to shape a region ready for the future. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ms. Latifa Haida Abdul Latif. Distinguished delegates, ladies and gentlemen, let us now proceed to the first panel discussion, the prospect of green infrastructure investment across different areas of the Indo-Pacific. Allow me to invite our moderator, Mr. David Boylan, Managing Director for ASEAN and East Asia of Mott MacDonald. Can we have a round of applause, please, ladies and gentlemen? And also our esteemed speakers. Would like to kindly invite Mr. Sulio Bongdala, CEO of Lokalao. Joining us, Mr. Glenn Keys, Executive Chair and Founder of Aspen Medical. We'd like to also invite Mr. Joachim von Amsberg, Special Advisor to the President of the Asian Infrastructure Investment Bank. And last but never the least, Ibu Emma Sri Martini, Finance Director of Pertamina. Mr. David Boylan, the floor is yours.
Many thanks, many thanks. Right, good morning, ladies and gentlemen. A very warm welcome to you all. Actually, a very big congratulations to you all as well for beating the Jakarta traffic and making it here. So well done. Just to reintroduce very quickly, my name is David Boylan. I'm the Managing Director of Mott MacDonald in Asia. And it really is my honor to be here today to moderate this plenary session where we're going to discuss the prospects of green infrastructure investment. I just very quickly want to place a loose definition around what we mean by green infrastructure investment. For me, it's really about talking about the allocation of financial resources to develop, maintain, or enhance systems that provide a wide range of environmental, economic, and social benefits. Now, taking into account some of the increasing weather extremes we're seeing around the world at the moment, green infrastructure investment centered on climate mitigation and adaptation is becoming ever more urgent. But of course, as we all know, there are some major challenges associated with green infrastructure investment, such as high upfront costs, very long payback periods, regulatory and policy barriers, as well as technical challenges and maintenance issues which really threaten long-term viability. So for the conversation today, we've got an absolutely brilliant panel lineup joining me. I just want to reintroduce Solio Vongdalo, the CEO of the tech startup Loka, which is now the leading ride-hailing service in Laos, and importantly, committed to plans for its entire vehicle fleet being electric by 2030 and supported by the development of electric vehicle charging infrastructure. The support of green infrastructure investment to transition to a low-carbon transport system for the ASEAN region is crucial. And I'm certainly looking forward to hearing from Solio some of your thoughts on this. Glenn Keys, who's the Executive Chair and Founder of Aspen Medical, who specialize in providing efficient and innovative healthcare solutions to what are often remote and under-resourced environments. Now, healthcare is a fascinating sector, especially when you consider the wide-ranging sustainability challenges it faces. For example, tackling the ever-increasing quantities of clinical waste. So it's going to be really interesting hearing from Glenn on some of the particular challenges the healthcare sector faces in respect to green infrastructure investment. Then Dr. Joachim von Amsberg, Special Advisor to the President of the Asian Infrastructure Investment Bank, AIIB. Multilateral banks and development finance institutions like AIIB play a really important role in mobilizing private capital towards green infrastructure projects. And they do this, for example, by reducing risk, helping with the high upfront costs associated with green infrastructure projects. So it's great having Dr. Joachim here and I look forward to his thoughts on green infrastructure investment from the perspective of the AIIB. And last but not least, I introduce Ibu Emma Sri Martini, who is the Director of Finance of Pertamina. And now Pertamina, like all energy majors, faces the challenge of low-carbon energy transition. But Pertamina has actually really made some important inroads to embracing low-carbon fuels, such as hydrogen and ammonia, as well as wider renewable energy investments, particularly into geothermal. So I'm really looking forward to hearing Ibu Emma's thoughts and views on the balance of simultaneously providing energy services whilst at the same time effecting a transition towards low-carbon future and also maintaining revenues and profits. So it's an amazing panel lineup. Welcome to you all. I'm really excited to hear from you all on the landscapes and opportunities of green infrastructure investments in our ASEAN region. And given the diversity of you all, I'm really looking forward to hearing about your experiences and best practices in pioneering green infrastructure, in particular how to overcome some of these challenges and building investor confidence. So without further ado, let's hear from our panel members on their insights and thoughts into this topic area. So a general question to you all first. I'll go through one by one. I'm very interested to hear from each of you in respect of how you see the trends, prospects and outlook of green infrastructure investment in the ASEAN Indo-Pacific region, particularly with reference to your particular industries. So let's start with Solio and electric vehicle infrastructure. Solio.
Yes. For us, like Loka and Laos, in the recent year, we have been seeing a lot of renewable projects. Similar, in the recent months, Laos has just approved the construction of the largest wind energy project, which is a 600 megawatt wind project in the southern of Laos, which is the largest in Southeast Asia. And in the transportation side, which is what we are doing in Laos, we've been investing heavily on the infrastructure on EV charging station, and also come up with the financing models that can help our drivers and other people to be able to transition from the gasoline vehicle into the electric cars. For Laos, it's quite challenging, but it has been very well adapted, similar to Thailand and similar in the ASEAN country as well. Now we are rapidly adapting the electric cars. And for us, we are more focusing on the transportation on the private sectors, transportation service. For us, now 10% of our 10% of the EV that has been imported to Laos are now on our platform. That's at the moment. And then I have seen a lot of smart city projects that help the community and city to build sustainable and communities. I think that's quite of the trend that's been going on in the regions. Yes.
Great, thank you very much, Solio. Glenn, interested to hear your thoughts.
Yeah, thank you. I think for us, there are 4 key areas that are critical for green infrastructure and what's going to drive business opportunity in the future. The first of those is actually cost saving, but you've got to look at it over the long term. Too many people are focused on what does it cost to build, not what does it cost to build and operate. And in the work we're doing, for example, here in Indonesia, where we'll have the very first green accredited hospital in the country, we can see dramatic savings in energy usage, water usage going forward. The next is social purpose. We find that staff want to work at a company that is taking an interest in the environment, investing in green infrastructure, and it drives customer engagement as well. Partners and investors is the next one. We find that like-minded people want to work on those areas, and they are hungry for organisations that are leading the push and are willing to take the investment to design for green infrastructure and what it means for the future. And lastly, responsibility. As you mentioned, healthcare is one of the largest users of environmental impact and leaving a carbon footprint. And so being able to show people that we are committed to a greener future, committed to reducing our carbon footprint, be it in the facilities we design, how they operate, or the equipment we use, is really, really critical. Particularly when you start to get into the Indo-Pacific area, where it is so expensive to get materials to and from, to produce materials locally, we are going out of our way to work and engage with local businesses to scale up, to provide us with the materials we need both during the construction and operations phases that we can buy locally, drive the economy, but drive down our carbon footprint and increase that green infrastructure example across the region.
Great, thank you, Glenn. Dr. Yohim, from the perspective of AIIB.
So in 2015, at the same time as the Paris Agreement was negotiated and concluded, Asian nations got together to create the Asian Infrastructure Investment Bank. All the 10 ASEAN members joined AIIB at that time with a specific mandate to finance infrastructure. And so, having been founded at the time of the Paris Agreement, green infrastructure was put into the DNA of the Asian Infrastructure Investment Bank. So I'm delighted to be here, and greening of infrastructure is at the core of our mandate. The greening of infrastructure is really an imperative. At least 60% of carbon emissions are directly associated with the energy and transport sectors. So there's just no way to preserve a livable planet without greening infrastructure. Asian nations, ASEAN countries are directly impacted by rising sea level, by weather events, and so climate adaptation is obviously a top priority for ASEAN nations, and again, green infrastructure that is focused on adaptation in addition to mitigation is central to, I think, the concerns of this region. What is the record so far? I think it's a very mixed one. There are some subsectors that have really taken off, especially in the renewable space, and here I have to single out the two largest markets, India and China, with two very, very different models, have taken off in a massive way. So you see massive investments in renewable that are now commercially viable in those two markets, as an example of the real breakthrough at scale. There are other areas where progress is much slower. There's still a lot of investment in carbon-intensive energy generation systems that will become stranded assets sooner rather than later. And the overall incentives for investments in green infrastructure are still, let me say, fragmented. It's a patchwork of incentives that are facing investors. There's an appeal from government, there are government targets, of course, there's pressure from some customer markets, there's pressure from some financial institutions, there are emerging voluntary carbon markets, and all these incentives sort of point in the direction toward more green infrastructure finance, green infrastructure investment. But they don't yet add up to a coherent framework of incentives. And I think that's why, on the one hand, clearly the transition, the decarbonization of ASEAN economies has begun, but on the other hand, there's still a very, very long way to go to actually make that transition happen at the scale and at the speed at which the targets that the international community has set itself will require.
Thank you very much, Dr. Yohim. Last but not least, Ibu Emma, your thoughts.
Can you hear me? Okay. Okay, I think in the case of Pertamina, by being a national oil company, Pertamina has to carry out our priority mandate, which is have to secure our national energy security. By Pertamina being an integrated oil company, we have to some extent some luxury because we do have infrastructure, integrated supply chain from upstream, midstream, and downstream. And starting within the year of 2020, with the push factor of having pandemic COVID at that time, we restructure our organizations to anticipate green energy transitions. We established 6 different subholding grouped by its cluster. I think this strategy is very effective to attracting investment, to attracting the business matching which particular sectors. The 6 different subholding consists of, the first one is upstream. This is mainly still focusing on the fossil fuel business. The second one in the refinery and petrochemical, this is energy transition, what we call it. And the third one is the commercial and trading. The fourth one, gas. The fifth is the integrated marine logistic, which is more inviting green infrastructure in this case. And the last one but not least is the subholding power and new renewable energy. This is our future business. Because Pertamina now, our revenue proportion is mostly contributed by fossil fuel, more than 95%. Going forward, revenue coming from renewable energy will be increasing over time. So I think that's why we try to put more allocations in terms of capex to more boosting investment in the renewable energy. Currently, our renewable energy coming from geothermal is still small. The capacity is still only around 700 megawatts. Gas to power 1.8 gigawatt. So I think in the next 5 years will be increasing quite significantly. So I think this is our strategy also to addressing global energy transitions by establishing two main strategies. The first one is decarbonization the existing business. How that we can operate with the greener operating model with the existing business. Because at the same time also we have to carry out to secure our national energy security. And the second one, how that we can build our low carbon fuel business, our green business. This is something to do with the green ammonia, green hydrogen, CCUS and all that. So I think those two mandates we have to carry out at the same times. Because we have to more focus on investing in renewable energy as well. That's why we put already in our net zero carbon roadmap. Yeah.
Thank you very much, Ibu, Emma, and thank you all for that overview of the opportunities there. So before going on to do a deeper dive into any of the specific sectors of transport, energy or healthcare, I just want to come back to Dr. Joachim and ask for a more general view of what you have seen as exemplary best practices and successful projects in green infrastructure in the ASEAN region, and of course particularly those supported by the AIIB.
Let me mention 3 examples for investments we have made that I think illustrate the opportunities for greening infrastructure in ASEAN. First is, as I already mentioned, the really booming renewable energy area. So we are investing, for example, in hydropower, pump storage in Indonesia, but also cross-border investments. So for example, energy connectivity between different ASEAN countries. We are investing in energy generation in Laos PDR, in wind power, in hydropower that is then used in the Vietnamese market as an example for how energy transmission across countries can actually raise and increase the share of renewables in the energy supply in ASEAN. So we're very proud and keen to expand those kinds of renewable investments. The second area I want to highlight is technological innovation. Studies show that 60% of the carbon reductions that are necessary to be achieved come from areas and technologies that are not yet mature, that are still under development. In order for us to help accelerate that development of new technologies, we have invested as limited partner in a number of private equity funds that are investing in companies, startups and other companies that are developing new technologies, whether it's in green hydrogen, whether it's in battery technology, whether it's in mobile technology, that are really developing those areas where the carbon savings will come from in the future. So there are areas that require equity financing, and again, as a multilateral, we have invested in a number of private equity funds that are providing that capital to technology companies in that space. Third and lastly, and in order to create private investment in infrastructure at scale, we are partnering with Singaporean institutions to help securitize infrastructure finance. Together with Clifford Capital, based in Singapore, Bayfront is a platform that purchases infrastructure loans from banks that originate these transactions, securitizes them and sells them to institutional investors. I mention that because it's a really interesting model of how to bring the large volume of available capital from institutional investors into the infrastructure space in developing market. Something we've all talked about for years, if not decades, and it's finally beginning to happen at some scale. And that work together with Singaporean Clifford Capital and Bayfront is to us the most promising development for bringing institutional capital. And that means capital at a much larger scale than individual project finance into that space. So we're very proud to be partnering with those initiatives and therefore making our little contribution toward the greening of infrastructure in ASEAN.
Thanks. And Solio, coming to yourself now. I mean, Dr. Joachim has just spoken there about the importance of really investing in pioneering technologies. And you yourself actually are a pioneer in green infrastructure and the application in Laos. I'm interested to know, why do you think pivoting to green infrastructure might be beneficial for business in the long run?
Yes, I think there are two main keys that driving our green infrastructure projects in Laos. Is like in the short term is obviously is about economic, right? Economic goal of the drivers. So Laos is, to give a little bit of context, it's a small country. We have 7 million people. So being in the small countries mean like you can change everything easier than the larger population, right? So Laos is, another thing is Laos is the second country in the Southeast Asia that pay the most expensive price for the gasoline. But we do have energy surplus of almost 80% on the electricity. So that's why I think like moving into the green infrastructure is the most making sense for the business and economy. For example, after we switch into the EV, we built the EV charging station around the country. Our drivers switch into the EV, they see the energy cost saving of 90%. Imagine you spend $100 on the gasoline driving for like maybe 500 kilometers. And now you only spend $10. You have $90 left in your pocket on every single $100 you spend. That's how much the energy saving on the driver's side. But another thing is for me is personal. It's quite personal because I think like if we want our children, I'm the father of 2, so if we want our children to live in the healthier environments and to think greens, now is the time to build the green infrastructure for them. So what we have been building is just part of that future for the next generation, especially my children. So I also hope that to encourage anybody else here as well, doesn't have to be a pioneer, but to participate in this green infrastructure development, that we hope that our next generation that would be able to benefit from what we have been building today. And that's what I also hope for my kid, to benefit from what I've been building today as well.
Thank you, Soler, and it's a very timely reminder. It's not all about business. Introduction of thoughts about the new generation is great. So, Glenn, you're pioneering the way in healthcare. I wonder if actually a few thoughts from you on the same question, if that's okay.
So I think it's really critical to explain to people what it is you're doing and how it's going to impact on lowering carbon footprint, lowering carbon emissions. And so we're investigating for the facilities we're doing that are green facilities, how do we explain to people the benefit of what's happening? They can't see geothermal work, they can't see the solar panels, they don't see the water recyclation. So you've got to explain that to them in a way that they can understand and start to interpret, and then get them to ask the question, well, if this hospital can do it, why not that one over there? So you've got to start to do that. But the other thing you need to do is get them thinking about what they're doing. So COVID for the world really prompted telehealth. Everybody was able to reach out through telehealth to get consults. Now what we want to do is say to people, every time you do a telehealth appointment, instead of driving across town to a doctor, you are reducing your carbon footprint. And so we're investigating the idea of having a little calculator that says at the end of your telehealth consult, this is the carbon credit you effectively created by having that telehealth consult. As AI comes more into data analysis and we're able to reduce treatment times because we have earlier diagnosis, that is also going to have an impact. And so the idea of saying to people, every time you see your doctor early rather than late, it's going to have a benefit, could flow on for years. And I really love the point of saying to us, and this is going to impact not just you, but your family, your children, and how it goes from there. The final piece I'd say is, before I get on that, is training. So a huge amount of training goes into health professionals. And we are now investigating not just remote training, we trained over 8 million people remotely during COVID, but now building towards VR and AR-based training so that you can have people in a room, you can train them no matter where they are in ASEAN or the Pacific, and yet be training them with some of the leading specialists. And suddenly you're not flying people in, you're increasing skills with a very reduced footprint. The final thing I'd suggest is there is a role for government here around incentives. And I don't mean to pay people, but to perhaps create an incentive that you could be fast-tracked to achieve perhaps a certain standard or accreditation or reduced payments. If you are not only promoting green infrastructure, but you're showing the public how they can do it as well. And that will motivate other industries to go, oh look, they've been accredited faster, maybe we can get that as well. So I think there's a role for industry to market what they're doing, to explain to people that every person is important in what they can do, and government to help incentivise it, not necessarily through additional funding, but perhaps through fast-tracking some approvals. Thanks.
Great, thank you very much, Glenn. Now, Ibu Emma, I'm going to come on to something a little bit more energy specific. So Pertamina, it's one of the biggest developers now of green ammonia and green hydrogen. I'm interested in your thoughts on how these new fuels fit into the global energy supply chain and how they can fulfill the ASEAN and the Indo-Pacific needs for green energy supply.
Yeah, I think Indonesia has a big potential for the green energy, including geothermal, as I mentioned earlier, that we do have also our subsidiary, we call it a subholding, Power and New Renewable Energy, which focusing on renewable energy. Now they are operating more than 700 megawatts, and going forward will be additional more than 200 megawatts will be operational in the next 1 to 2 years. Yeah. And beside that, also gas to power. Talking about green ammonia as well as green hydrogens, clearly that by having geothermal, we'll be having potential for green hydrogens. Again, as our mandate as being a national oil company, that our priority is to secure our national energy security. So there are some conversations with our potential off-taker for green hydrogens. So our first priority is to provide national energy security first. And the second one, certainly we can be able to export our green hydrogen, provided the readiness level of the green hydrogen off-taker here in Indonesia probably maybe taking some time to be able to off-taking our green hydrogen product. That's why we try to discuss with our potential off-taker as well. Related to how that we can tap financing to support us in terms of implementing all those green energy initiatives. Again, we have many options to do that. And first thing first, we have to be able that we can prove that ourselves we are operating in a greener operating model. With proof our ESG score is really convincing enough. Now that we are sitting at the second rank of sub-industry oil and gas integrated. So we really committed that our operating really committed to support ESG. So this is our attractive factors that for us can be more easy to invite our strategic partner to invest in our green infrastructure.
Great, and I love the bit when you're saying, well, how to tap the financing, which brings me back to Dr. Joachim. Listening to Ibu Emma and the potential role of new technologies and low carbon fuels such as hydrogen, ammonia, what can the multilaterals like AIIB do to support and accelerate the growth of industrial decarbonisation in ASEAN and the Indo-Pacific?
The role of multilateral development banks like the World Bank, the ADB, and the Asian Infrastructure Investment Bank is really to bridge the gap between the supply and the demand for infrastructure finance. And it's a bit of a paradox. You have this huge need for investment. The studies that say $1.5 trillion of investment needed in Asia every year, just to quote one of those gigantic numbers. And that investment is not yet happening at that scale. On the other hand, you have very large amounts of capital that are looking for projects, looking for investment opportunities, looking for yield. And the demand and the supply often do not meet. The actual flow of investment into these projects is actually quite small in emerging markets. And the multilateral development banks' role is really to connect the demand and supply in three ways. One is on our balance sheet. So institutional investors can buy our bonds. And we use the proceeds of these bonds to make loans and investments in projects, infrastructure projects in ASEAN. That's the direct way. We make very long-term loans at favorable conditions based on these funds we receive through our bond issuances. That's good, that's important, but it is ultimately limited by the size of our balance sheet. So therefore, in addition to that, we work together with our co-financiers, with private investors. And through the presence of multilaterals, often private investors have comfort that projects are implemented to international standards, for example, on carbon, on environmental social standards, on emission reductions, that there is trust in the roles that government play in those roles. Often regulatory risks are one of the biggest obstacles to private investment in infrastructure, and the presence of multilaterals provides some protection that governments will honor commitments they are making, because these same governments are our shareholders as multilaterals. So there's a privileged relationship with governments. So that's the second way. The third and final way we do is by helping create markets. And I just referred to my comment earlier on the creation of the securitization platform, which is an example of where we are helping create a market for finance flows from institutional investors to infrastructure that did not exist before. But again, it's one of those roles where multilaterals, yes, provide some money, but also provide the framework for a partnership between those different parties that have to come together to make this flow of finance from the large pool of investors to this huge need for investment a reality.
Great, thank you, Dr. Joachim. Coming back to Glenn, we've just heard from Ibu Emma and Dr. Joachim on the potential of new energy supplies and the investment opportunities that there are. But of course, pivoting to sustainable energy supplies is one part of the equation, but being more efficient in our consumption of energy is another often overlooked aspect. I'm wondering what your thoughts are on how we increase grassroots awareness and encourage behavioural change on energy conservation. That's to Glenn. That was to you.
Sorry. Look, I think you've really got to try to understand what is motivating people. I think there's a great opportunity for the use of digitisation around talking to people at a grassroots level. I think we need to understand what's an easy mechanism to get to people, social media, and how it can be used around what it means for them, for example, for the use of biotechnology, for monitoring. Patient monitoring has become a big deal and will only grow over time. And I think being able to take developments, explain them in a very, very understandable way, strong use of social media and, less cats and start getting to talking about what really influences people in their lives, I think will be a critical way to get people across understanding at a grassroots level what is required to change behaviour and that every single person is responsible at that level. And health is something that is really critical. I think we also want to think that who is reading the messages in a healthcare sector, 80% of all healthcare decisions are made by women. And understanding that, understanding how we talk to that demographic and what's important. If you look at the age groups across ASEAN and even the Pacific, ASEAN is young. While the developed world is growing old, ASEAN is young. About 50% of the population of Indonesia is under the age of 30. And so they are the people who are motivated by the future. giving them the opportunity to make a clear decision between something that has a green initiative and a low carbon footprint compared to something that doesn't, that's going to drive behaviour very, very quickly.
Great, thank you, Glenn. I think we've just about got time for one last question because I'm being encouraged to finish on time because apparently there's a VIP following us. Last question to Solio. How can digital platforms like LOCA play a role in diminishing carbon emissions and nurturing a sustainable urban ecosystem?
Yes, Glenn made a really, really big point, connected to what we did. Besides communicating with the social media, which make a really big impact on our communication side. But on our platform side, for LOCA, we have two communication that we have to do. First is the customer. Second is the driver. The driver is really person that's really grassroots that we need to educate them. So for our driver on their mobile application, we actually have a dashboard for them. If they are still driving a gasoline car, we will tell them this is how much you spend on the gasoline. This is what would you benefit if you switch into the EV. And then they see the carbon emission in real time and also seeing the money that they would save in real time. That make them encourage them want to switch. But after they switch, they also see their real-time data, how much money they have been saving and how much pollution they have been reduced. So that they can also communicate with another grassroots drivers that make a domino and network effect. So the impact has been huge. In 2021, there is only 140 EV imported to Laos. In 2022, there's 1,400. That's the number of increasing. But total EV in Laos right now, around 2,500 EV have been imported so far. And 10% of that now are on a platform. Because of our driver, they have been communicating. And then on the customer side, we recently introduced, we call a climate dashboard. So when you ride on our EV, you can see in real time how much pollution you have been reducing in real time. That's also helped to educate the customer as well, that not only that you are on the green ride, but now you have been seeing what impact you have been made to the environment and the community in real time. That's what we use the digital platform for.
Solio, thank you very much, and thank you to all the panelists. Just a few wrapping up points from myself by way of summation. You know, I think it's been absolutely fantastic hearing about the scale of the opportunity, especially in transport, healthcare, and the world of energy. And really, whilst there are challenges, it's really quite reassuring to hear how, you know, there are so many examples of how these challenges are being overcome, and most importantly, how the role of finance plays within that, and enabling finance, certainly with the help of the multilaterals. I guess one final point of reflection that I've taken away from this discussion, almost all of you actually, as panelists, hit on a common theme of the role of government and what role government can play. You know, for me, whilst government has played a role, a lot of the initiatives and the overcoming the challenges has been largely driven by innovation within the private sector itself. So I wonder going forward, you know, as a final question, what more can government do in the ASEAN to really create an enabling environment for green infrastructure investment and to really fulfill that potential? So, can everybody please join me in thanking all of the panelists. It's been an absolutely great pleasure to host you all. Thank you very much for all of your contributions. Thank you.
Ladies and gentlemen, distinguished delegates, once again, please give a big round of applause to Mr. David Boylan as our moderator for the first panel discussion and also our esteemed speakers for the depth insights. Excellencies, distinguished delegates, ladies and gentlemen, before we proceed to our next agenda, please allow me to share with you a little bit of the background of the ASEAN Indo-Pacific Forum as an implementation of the ASEAN Outlook on the Indo-Pacific a flagship event organized by Indonesia as a part of its ASEAN chairmanship in 2023. The ASEAN Indo-Pacific Forum aims to unlock further opportunities and build stronger connectivity between ASEAN countries and the Indo-Pacific. It will serve as an inclusive platform for ASEAN member states and partners, mainly from the public and private sectors, to engage in constructive discussions, identify potential tangible projects, and promote collaboration in the Indo-Pacific. 3 major issues of the future will be discussed. The first is green infrastructure and resilient supply chain. Second is sustainable and innovative financing. And third, digital transformation and creative economy. Excellencies, distinguished delegates, ladies and gentlemen, let us pivot to our next discussion, on sub-theme 1, and that is green infrastructure and resilient supply chain. With CEO Fireside Chat on developing green infrastructure in the Indo-Pacific, current state and beyond. Without further ado, please allow me to invite on stage our speaker, Ibu Nika Widiawati as CEO of Pertamina, and also Mr. Nick Marsh, BBC Asia Business Correspondent, as our moderator for this discussion. Mr. Nick Marsh, please go ahead. Ibu Nika Widiawati, kami persilakan.
Okay.
Mr. Marsh, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. Hello, everyone. Welcome to this short fireside chat on developing green infrastructure in the Indo-Pacific. I'm Nick. I work for the BBC as their Asia business correspondent based in Singapore. David, the previous moderator, said that there's a VIP following him. I'm sorry, that's definitely not me. I think that's the one after. But it is a pleasure to be here. It's an even bigger pleasure to have you, Ibu Nika Widiawati, Chief Executive of Pertamina, Indonesia's state oil and gas company, of course. Good morning, and thank you for being here, Ibu.
Yeah, morning. Good morning. May I call you Nick?
Of course.
So Nick and Nika, it's a good combination. So thank you for having me here, and sorry for coming late. So
that's okay. It's Jakarta traffic.
It's okay.
I don't know if everyone can hear Ibu with the microphone.
Okay.
I think that's a bit better, isn't
Yes.
it? Yeah, okay. Look, Pertamina is involved in so much about Indonesia's green energy transition. I just wanted to start by asking you this. Indonesia has some very ambitious targets when it comes to renewable energies. The country wants 23% of its energy mix by 2025 to be renewables. At the moment, it's about 10%. Sitting here right now, how confident are you that Indonesia can more than double its proportion of renewables in just 2 years?
Yeah. Okay. Thank you, Nick. So we are all now facing the same challenge in climate. So I don't want to jump to new and renewable energy. Before that, we have to having the same perspective and understanding. We are talking about the climate change. So the most important thing is how is the energy transition pathway? We have the same objective. The finish line is net zero emission, not zero, net zero emission. But now each country have a different position, different starting point. So differing in economic development stage and also social challenge will lead to different energy transition pathway. For Indonesia, we are a developing country, and we have the ambitious target to increase our GDP, to maintain the stable economic growth, as well as inflation rate. So we need an energy as a catalyst for our economic growth. What we have to do now is energy security. It should keep maintaining. Pertamina is state-owned enterprise, have a mandate to maintain the energy security and energy resiliency. But on the other hand, we also have to support the government target to achieve net zero emission. So we have 3 parallel main agenda actually for achieving that target. First, we keep maintaining our legacy business, but with different operation methodology. We do several initiatives for decarbonization. So there is, our legacy business is carbon positive, but through the decarbonization program, we reduce that. There is the short term, but we have also the mitigation for the long term. For example, for the oil business, we develop the two main agenda regarding the existing asset, our refinery. So we'll convert our refinery to be green refinery. So we can improve and accelerate our bioenergy. And the second is integrated refinery and petrochemical. So when the fuel demand decline, we have two products, bio asset. So there is a first. The second, we develop the zero carbon neutral business, just like geothermal. We have a huge potential in geothermal, hydro. So there is a carbon neutral initiative. The third one, since we still have the carbon positive, we have an initiative for carbon negative. It is CCUS and natural-based solution. So we have an abundant potential in CCUS, in NBS. And Indonesia also have a potential in critical material for energy transition. We are the biggest nickel reserve as well as nickel production, the second biggest in tin, the sixth biggest in bauxite, and the seventh biggest in copper. And we have also 400 gigaton CO2 storage potential for CCUS and NBS, one of the rainforests, the largest rainforest in the world. So there is a three main agenda that should be managed in parallel to keep maintaining the energy transition with and reducing the carbon emission and with affordable. It's very important for us, developing country. The energy security, energy accessibility, and affordability. There's just three main agenda that we have to keep maintaining, especially for Pertamina as state-owned enterprise.
Yeah. I mean, you've outlined a real range there of ways that Indonesia can move towards renewables, it can move towards net zero. You've also just used that phrase there, net zero, rather than not zero, because Indonesia's very much it's in its own situation compared to a lot of countries when it comes to transitioning towards net zero. So the idea is that companies can continue polluting so long as they offset that.
It is carbon offsetting.
Yeah, so I would offset that and remove that carbon from the atmosphere. I want to focus in on one method that kind of taps into that kind of net zero rather than not zero. That's carbon capture storage. You said Indonesia can be a real hub for that. There's lots of untapped places, basins, reserves where carbon can be stored. But carbon capture storage, as we all know, has its detractors. It's incredibly expensive. The efficacy of it has also been, widely doubted. And also a lot of people say it doesn't really offer an incentive for fossil fuel companies to actually move away from using fossil fuels, right? What would you say to that, as the chief executive of Indonesia's oil and gas state company?
Yeah, so before 2002, Indonesia is net exporter with the daily production around 1.5 million barrel per day. So means we have a huge capacity in our reservoir. Our preliminary study found that we have 400 gigaton CO2 storage capacity. We started already. Last year, we inject the carbon from our one block, Subang, CO2 from Subang block, inject to one of our block near the location, we call it Jati Barang, and successfully complete. From that carbon injection, we not just store the carbon, but also increase the production of oil and gas in that block, around 50%. So now we are in progress for the second project in Sukowati. And then now we are also progressing in the third project in Sunda Asri Basin with one of the global company that our study in one location, we have the potential around 2 gigatons CO2 storage. And we signed already with some company as a customer. How about the economic point of view? Technology. I believe that along the way there is, the improvement of technology that can reducing the capex as well as opex. But there is depend on our scheme or mechanism. For example, in our Jati Barang block, we just send the CO2 by pipeline. We don't have to convert or liquefaction the CO2 and distribute to the vessel. The same case in Sundrasi. We will try to look for the CO2 surrounding that area and just transport it by pipeline. So make it more up. We can reduce the capex as well. With 400 gigaton CO2 potential, Indonesia can become a regional hub of CO2. Now the government start to establish new regulation for the carbon utilization. Now we have the regulation for carbon utilization, but still in progress for carbon storage, as well as open for the regional country to store also in our CCUS storage.
I mean, you mentioned the huge potential there. We were just talking before this chat here on stage about where the money's going to come from. Because, for example, the Just Energy Transition Partnership money, that's focused on renewables, right? This is a whole different thing. This is about offsetting the pollution that comes from using fossil fuels. Where is this money going to come from? It's really expensive, isn't it?
Yeah. So, carbon trading mechanism. One of the collaboration that can be created in ASEAN Indo-Pacific, we have the regional carbon trading mechanism. So there's the money come from the carbon tax, carbon trading mechanism. So it's more feasible. But I told to the JETP, if we can propose something, just energy transition is not related to new and renewable only, but also how to make a transition, the energy transition. As I mentioned before, we cannot jump from fossil energy to new and renewable energy. Just an orderly and affordable transition, we have to do that.
Yeah.
So our proposal to JETP is also include the decarbonization initiative in the JETP scope.
Yeah,
it's
so
very important.
Broadening the scope there, yeah. You mentioned carbon markets as well. That's something we'll be talking about later on this afternoon. Look, we only have a couple of minutes, so I'm going to ask you if it's possible to be brief. You've got the Pertamina on its website has the 8 pillars of its energy transition, right? I'm just going to go through them here, and I want you to pick one and get our audience excited about the one that you see most potential in. You've got green refinery, bioenergy, geothermal, hydrogen, gasification, EVs, like you were talking about earlier, new renewable energies, and the circular carbon economy, which you just touched on there.
So maybe I will choose the green refinery. Also the bioenergy. Why? Our strategy, actually, how to achieve the energy security and energy independency, national energy independency, through unleashing our domestic resources. We have a lot of the primary energy for bioenergy. So we start already actually with biodiesel, B35. 35% is coming from CPO based. And now, B35, last year, per year, we successfully reduced around 28 million tons CO2 from that initiative. And as well as we can reduce the imported. And the second is biogasoline. We will blend our gasoline with ethanol, bioethanol, that's coming from molasses, sugarcane, or cassava, or corn and sorghum. And the second generation can produce from the waste. And the third is SAF, sustainable aviation fuel. So through bioenergy, the just energy transition, everybody say that during energy transition, no one left behind. So my thinking is, Indonesia have 280 million people. If we just move to new and renewable energy, so what is the employment? Unemployment will be increased. So if we accelerate the bioenergy, there is a plantation will be grow.
Great.
And can absorb all the employment there, and then the processing facility, the distribution, existing distribution can be used, as well as ICE, internal combustion. So all the ecosystems still the same.
Okay. Thank you very much. That was a really difficult task I gave you. You completed it with aplomb in 2 minutes. Thank you, Iba Nika Widyawati, Chief Executive of Pertamina. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Nick.
Thank you very much, Mr. Nick Marsh and Ibu Nika Widyawati, for your great insights and also expertise. Can you please return to your seats? Distinguished delegates, ladies and gentlemen, as of current, we are still waiting for the Honorable Anthony Albanese, MP, Prime Minister of Australia. We thank you for your kind patience and understanding. I kindly invite you also to please remain seated, and once again to ensure that all mobile devices is switched to silent or vibrant mode. Thank you. Ladies and gentlemen, distinguished delegates, if you would please be seated at your seat, as we are now waiting seconds away to wait for the arrival of the Honorable Anthony Albanese, MP, Prime Minister of Australia. We thank you for your understanding. Distinguished delegates, ladies and gentlemen, if you would please be seated at your seat as we are going to proceed to our first Leaders Talk of the day. We thank you for your attention. Ladies and gentlemen, please rise for the arrival of the Honorable Anthony Albanese MP, Prime Minister of Australia. Alongside with the Minister of State-Owned Enterprise of the Republic of Indonesia, Mr. Eric Thohir. Ladies and gentlemen, you may kindly be seated. Distinguished delegates, ladies and gentlemen, we proceed to our first Leaders Talk. Without further ado, it is our honor to invite the Honorable Anthony Albanese MP, Prime Minister of Australia. Your Excellency, the floor is yours.
Well, thank you very much to ministers who've joined us today. I thank you for giving me the honour of your presence here. And it is wonderful to be back in Jakarta. Thanks for the warm welcome back to this great city. When Australia became ASEAN's first dialogue partner in 1974, my predecessor, Prime Minister Gough Whitlam, described ASEAN as unquestionably the most important and the most relevant group in our region. Half a century later, Australia and Southeast Asia have both changed profoundly. We are both more diverse and we are more engaged. Our economies are more open, more modern and more connected. Our prosperity and security and stability more intertwined. We face environmental challenges, economic uncertainty and strategic competition on a level of complexity that could not have been imagined 49 years ago. And yet for all that has changed, a defining truth endures. The centrality of ASEAN is vital to Australia's future because Australia and ASEAN are bound by more than an accident of geography or the virtue of history. We share a common belief in the opportunities of this region, the potential of our peoples, and we hold a common responsibility to advance stability, peace and prosperity for every nation that calls Southeast Asia home. To recognise the sovereignty of every country and the inherent dignity of every individual. To ensure this is a region where each of us can shape our own destiny and secure our own future, to ensure that we continue to work together. And I'm here to affirm Australia's belief in the power and value of ASEAN centrality, and to match those words with deeds. Today I announce our government's strategy for the most significant upgrade of Australia's economic engagement with ASEAN for a generation, an overdue strengthening of our engagement to reflect the speed of the transformation underway and the scale of the opportunities which are ahead. The strategy we outlined today reflects an enduring truth. This is where Australia's economic destiny lies, and this is where our shared prosperity can be built. This is where, working together, the peace, stability and security of this region and the Indo-Pacific can be assured. The framework we are outlining today charts a course all the way to 2040, by which time ASEAN's combined economy is expected to be the 4th largest in the world. We are building on a strong foundation. In 2022, ASEAN accounted for nearly 15% of Australia's overall trade, greater than our two-way trade with Japan or the United States. But Australia's economic engagement with the region has not kept pace with the growth of Southeast Asian economies. Australia should be a larger trade and investment partner for Southeast Asia. The ambitious plan that we're sharing with you today takes us beyond catching up. It positions us for what's ahead. Throughout 2023, Australia's Special Envoy to Southeast Asia, Mr. Nicholas Moore, has travelled up and down the region, visiting every ASEAN nation besides Myanmar. He's had hundreds of conversations. He's absorbed hundreds of written submissions. And today I am launching Mr. Moore's report, Invested, Australia's Southeast Asia Economic Strategy to 2040. Mr. Moore has identified 4 key priorities: raising awareness, strengthening understanding of markets, sectors and emerging trends, removing blockages, addressing barriers to trade and investment, building capability, ensuring Australia and the region have the skills and knowledge to work effectively together, and deepening investment, supporting Australian investors to identify, develop and finalise prospective deals in the region. He's also identified a number of key sectors which offer the greatest potential for growth, including agriculture and food, energy security and the clean energy transition, infrastructure and education and skills. Australia brings a lot to the table in expertise, goods, services and capital. We are a provider of first-class services, particularly in health and education. Our fast-growing tech sector is one of the largest in the Southern Hemisphere. We are a reliable, high-quality supplier of commodities, including in agriculture, minerals and energy. We are ready to use our strength in critical minerals, as well as abundant sun and wind resources, to support a secure and stable energy transition for the region. There are significant opportunities for our businesses in Southeast Asia's fast-growing economies, including in infrastructure and the clean energy transition. We will also benefit from further Southeast Asian investment and exports, which are already making a notable contribution to the Australian economy. The foundations are there too. Businesses across the region are already engaging. We've got Australian high-tech company Powerledger partnering with Thai solar providers to trial rooftop solar energy trading between apartment blocks in Bangkok. There's the Malaysian engineering company Gamuda working with the New South Wales government to build the Sydney Metro West. There's Australian company Oricon providing engineering and design services for exciting infrastructure and energy projects in Vietnam. And Indonesia's cutting-edge technology company, Bukalapak, which collaborated with the Victorian government to open its first international technology hub in Melbourne in 2023. These are just a few examples among many. It's the same story with trade. Leading Australian company Cochlear has transformed the lives of over 9,000 people in Southeast Asia through distribution of its sophisticated hearing implants. If you're lucky enough to be served a quintessential Australian lamington, which I recommend, the coconut is likely to hail from the Philippines. Our economies and our cultures are already so intertwined in ways big and small. But what Mr. Moore kept hearing during his extensive consultations was that both sides can do more. Australia is ambitious for what we can achieve with the region to tackle the challenge of climate change, for example. And we recognise that it's in all our interests to support the net zero transition. Greater trade diversification, including through supply chains, is also in the region's and Australia's mutual interests. There is so much potential still untapped. My government will respond to all the findings of this comprehensive report in due course, but there are some we're acting on right away. Today I announced we have committed $95.4 million to support 3 initiatives that go to the heart of the strategy's priorities. We'll form new deal teams based in Southeast Asia and drawing on public and private sector expertise to identify opportunities for Australian investors and support projects through to finalisation. These teams will develop a pipeline of investment-ready projects and advise Australian investors on matters from regulatory approvals to finding local commercial partners. We'll also embark on a new Southeast Asia Business Exchange program to boost two-way trade. This will improve awareness of trade opportunities both in Australia and in Southeast Asia. And we'll set up an exchange program for young professionals, building enduring links between Australian and Southeast Asian businesses. This will see talented young people from Australia gain experience working in Southeast Asian companies, as well as Southeast Asian professionals gaining experience in Australian businesses. I look forward to getting these up and running. Deepening our engagement with Southeast Asia is an absolute priority for Australia and for my government. But as I've said today, it's also an opportunity for the whole region. In the years ahead, all of us will benefit from the security we build together, the prosperity we create together, the stability that we preserve together, the sovereignty we respect together, the environmental commitments we fulfil together, the energy transition we drive together. We can make Australia's, ASEAN's next half-century even more successful than the last. And we can share in that success, ASEAN and Australia, together. I thank you very much for your attention today.
Thank you very much. The Honourable Anthony Albanese MP, Prime Minister of Australia. Ladies and gentlemen, please rise. The Honourable Anthony Albanese MP, Prime Minister of Australia. Distinguished delegates, ladies and gentlemen, please be seated. We had just concluded our first leader talk of the day. And would like to kindly say thank you for the support of our partners, Bank Rakyat Indonesia, Pertamina, PT PL and Persero, Bank Negara Indonesia, Bank Mandiri, Mind ID, Telkom Indonesia, and Journey. Area, British Chamber of Commerce Indonesia, Google, Indonesian Business Council, PT Sun Cable Indonesia, Standard Chartered, ASEAN Food and Beverages Alliance, ASEAN Center for Biodiversity, Canada ASEAN Business Council, European Union Delegation to ASEAN, Google Arts and Culture, Lembaga Penjamin Simpanan, ROK Mission, U.S. ASEAN Business Council, World Intellectual Property Organization. We'd like to also thank our partners ADB, Amazon, Bloomberg News, Booking.com, Coca, Netflix, Thales and Zoom to support our event ASEAN Indo-Pacific Forum implementation of the ASEAN Outlook on the Indo-Pacific. We thank you to all of you distinguished delegates, ladies and gentlemen, for your time and attendance and also participating on the ASEAN Indo-Pacific Forum for Day 2. Distinguished delegates, ladies and gentlemen, we'd like to proceed to a briefer session that will be delivered by Mr. Pahala Nugraha Mansuri, the Vice Minister of Foreign Affairs of the Republic of Indonesia, with the main topic, Indonesia Plan for Developing Green Infrastructure. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Bapak Pahala Nugraha Mansuri.
Excellencies, distinguished delegates, participants, ladies and gentlemen, in today's briefing session, I would like to brief you all of Indonesia's plan in developing the green infrastructure to achieve its emission reduction target. Indonesia is committed to reducing emissions by 31.9% by 2030 with our national capacity and by 43.2% with international support. We are also very committed to be able to achieve net zero by the year of 2060. To support this ambition, Indonesia will focus on 5 major initiatives, particularly focusing on building the green infrastructure. First, increasing the capacity of our renewable energy. Indonesia has the potential to build 22 gigawatts of geothermal power, 75 gigawatt of hydropower, about 6.6 gigawatt of solar and biomass, and about 60.6 gigawatt of wind power. Our electricity development plan, 2022 to 2030, is the first of such plan with commitment to build more capacity of electricity from renewable resources. But Indonesia has more potential in renewable energy development than just in electricity. Which brings me to the second initiative, the development of biofuel, biomass, and other green molecules such as green hydrogen. By 2023, Indonesia has already developed B35, replacing about 35% of our diesel oil with FAME. And Pertamina has also launched recently Green Pertamax, which is comprised of gasoline as well as bioethanol, and targeting to be able to achieve E20 before 2030. Third, we are also launching and building our electric mobility and EV ecosystem in Indonesia. With about 26% of the world's resources in nickel, Indonesia has the ambitious plan to make batteries with a capacity of more than 140 gigawatt hour in the year of 2030. Other ASEAN member states also have great potentials, such as the Philippines, which are actually also has a very significant potential in developing nickel. In Indonesia, we also have more resources than just nickel. And third, we are also trying to actually build also our capability and also our capacity in the area of not only biofuel, but we are also building our ability to be able to connect the green industry cluster. As you know, all of the ASEAN right now, we all have the ambition to be able to become part of the global supply chain in the EV ecosystem and also beyond. And therefore, to be able to develop a much more cohesive EV ecosystem, we need to also be able to connect our green industry cluster through what we call the green ASEAN grid. And that is also one of the key outcomes of today's ASEAN summit, is that how are we going to be able to connect the ASEAN member states through what we call the ASEAN grid. And I think one of the key potential thing that we are going to be able to realize by connecting all of the ASEAN member states through ASEAN grid is that we are going to be able to develop a much more cohesive ecosystem in building the future supply chain for the world, including that in battery. Lastly, the development of the EV ecosystem as well as the manufacturing capacity will not be able to be realized without the connectivity amongst the ASEAN member states. And therefore, building green ports and storage for the green molecules, such as green hydrogens and sustainable aviation fuel, is one of the key elements of how are we going to be able to develop a much more cohesive ecosystem and much more regionalized supply chain in being able to develop this EV ecosystem. So some of the examples that we are actually seeing right now, for example, that there is an emerging hydrogen market that will be created of about 1.4 trillion market by the year of 2050, and therefore Indonesia right now is pushing for this initiative. Indonesia is still at the very nascent state of green hydrogen development. Regarding the SAF, Pertamina has also been developing as a sustainable aviation fuel through many of the initiative that we have. I think that's all that I can brief you on this green infrastructure. We hope that we'll actually give you some ideas about the topic that we will discuss in the following panel. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Bapak Pahala Nugraha Mansuri, the Vice Minister of Foreign Affairs of the Republic of Indonesia. Excellencies, distinguished delegates, participants, ladies and gentlemen, before we proceed to our next agenda or the second leader's talk of the day, if you wish to acquire an interpretation devices, the SIS receiver, you could collect it at the left side of the ballroom. Delegates, ladies and gentlemen, as now we are waiting for the next leader's talk with His Excellency Kishida Fumio, Prime Minister of Japan, we kindly request all delegates, participants, ladies and gentlemen, to please be seated as we await for His Excellency Kishida Fumio. Distinguished delegates, participants, ladies and gentlemen, once again, if you wish to acquire an interpretation devices, the SIS receivers, you may so collect it at the left side of the ballroom. And once again, we kindly request of you for you to please stay seated, and also to ensure your mobile device to be switched to silent or vibrant mode. Thank you. Ladies and gentlemen, once again, if you wish to acquire an interpretation devices, the SIS receivers, you could collect the SIS receivers at the left side of the bellroom. Thank you. So once again, if you acquire an interpretation devices, the SIS receivers, you may so collect it at the left side of the ballroom. Thank you. Distinguished delegates, participants, ladies and gentlemen, we'd like to kindly remind you once again, if you wish to acquire an interpretation devices, the SIS receivers, it could be collected at the left side of the ballroom. So once again, if you need an interpretation device, the SIS receivers, you can collect them at the left side of the ballroom. And once again, we kindly remind you to please be seated. Thank you. Ladies and gentlemen, please rise for the arrival of His Excellency Kishida Fumio, Prime Minister of Japan. Your Excellency, you may proceed to the podium. And the floor is yours. Ladies and gentlemen, you may please be seated.
Hi, ご来賓の皆様、スラマットパギ、おはようございます。この度、日本 ASEAN 友好協力50周年、そして日インドネシア外交関係樹立65周年の記念すべき年に、日本の総理大臣としてインドネシアを訪問し、この ASEAN インド太平洋フォーラムにおいてお話しできますことを大変光栄に思っております。インドネシアをはじめとする ASEAN 諸国の飛躍的な経済発展に後押しされ、インド太平洋地域は世界経済を力強く牽引をしています。インドネシアが本年の ASEAN 議長国として成長の中心、エピセントラム・オブ・グロースをテーマに掲げたこと、これはまさに時機を得たものだと思います。また、今回のフォーラムにおいて、日本から多くの協力プロジェクトが紹介される、このことを大変誇らしく思います。ASEAN の掲げるインド太平洋に関する ASEAN アウトロック AIPF と日本が進める自由で開かれたインド太平洋 FOIP は開放性、透明性、あるいは包摂性、国際法の尊重といった本質的な原則を共有しています。ASEAN の中心性、一体性を一貫して支持してきた日本は、2019年にいち早くこの AOIP への全面的な支持を表明いたしました。そして本日、ここに私は、日 ASEAN 包括的連結性イニシアティブを発表し、日本として6つの分野で連結性強化の協力を進めていく旨、宣言をいたします。6つの分野とは、具体的に次の通りです。第一に、交通インフラの整備です。港湾、道路、鉄道、空港を整備をし、ASEAN 諸国の人の流れ、物の流れを促進していく。我が国が現在実施しているプロジェクトは約2兆8000億円分にまで拡大をしています。ハード面での協力に加え、技術面によるソフト面での協力を行い、日本の技術や知識を継続的に提供してまいります。第2に、デジタルコネクティビリティです。日本は ASEAN 各国のさらなるデジタル化、デジタル化、そしてデジタル技術を用いた地域の連結性強化に協力していくとともに、サイバー空間の安全を守ることに貢献をしていきます。第3に、海洋協力です。海でつながった日本と ASEAN 諸国の連結性を強化する上で重要な要素です。 我が国は海上保安機関や海上警察への研修の実施、巡視船の供与などを通じて、海上法執行能力の強化を支援していきます。第4は、サプライチェーンの強靭化です。新型コロナのパンデミックや、ロシアのウクライナ侵略を受け、物資の安定的な流通の確保や、食料安全保障が重要な課題となっています。我が国は ASEAN 地域のサプライチェーン強靭化に貢献し、共に危機に強い経済、これを築いていきます。第5に、電力の連結性です。急速な経済発展を遂げている ASEAN 地域では、電力需要も増大しています。安定的な電力供給を確保するため、我が国はマスタープランの策定や研修などを通じて、電力の連結性向上を支援していきます。そして最後に、人、地の連結性です。社会の発展を支えているのは人であり、人が持つ知です。我々は幅広い分野の人材交流や研修事業などを通じて、ASEAN 諸国の人材を育成するとともに、日本と ASEAN 諸国の人々のネットワーク、これを強化していきます。日本はこれらの分野において、今後3年間で5000人の人材育成を行います。ASEAN 諸国と技術協力を進め、ネットワークを強化することで、我が国も ASEAN とともに成長していく。日本と ASEAN が新たな社会的価値を共有できる未来を築いていきたいと思います。本年12月、日本 ASEAN 友好協力50周年の締めくくりに、ASEAN 諸国の首脳を東京にお招きをし、日 ASEAN 特別首脳会議を開催いたします。そしてその場で将来の日 ASEAN 関係と協力の大きな方向性を示すビジョンを共同で打ち出したいと考えています。政治、安全保障、経済、文化、社会の各分野にわたる幅広い協力のイニシアティブを打ち出すとともに、魅力ある文化、人的、知的交流や日本語教育支援の取り組み、これをさらに推進してまいります。こうした取り組みを通じて、日本と ASEAN の輝ける友情を次世代につなぎ、新たな時代を我々の輝ける機会とすべく、皆さんと共に前進してまいりましょう。照りまかし、ありがとうございました。
Thank you very much, His Excellency Kishida Fumio, Prime Minister of Japan. Ladies and gentlemen, please rise as His Excellency Kishida Fumio, Prime Minister of Japan, leaving the premises. Distinguished delegates, ladies and gentlemen, you may please be seated. Distinguished delegates, participants, ladies and gentlemen, in a short while, we'll be tapping on the second panel discussion on resilient supply chain Indo-Pacific as a production hub for strategic industries, including EV and battery. We kindly request and we kindly invite for all participants, distinguished delegates, ladies and gentlemen, to please be seated as once again we'll proceed to our next agenda, and that is the second panel discussion. Thank you. Distinguished delegates, ladies and gentlemen, in a short while, we'll be proceeding to our next agenda, and that is the second panel discussion. We kindly invite for all participants, ladies and gentlemen, to take your seat as our next program will begin shortly. Thank you. Distinguished delegates, ladies and gentlemen, We kindly invite for all of you to please remain seated. And also, we kindly remind you once again to ensure that all mobile devices to be switched off on or vibrate ringtone. Thank you very much. Distinguished delegates, participants, ladies and gentlemen, we are now tapping at the second panel discussion, Resilient Supply Chain, Indo-Pacific as a production hub for strategic industries, including EV and battery. With that said, we'd like to kindly invite on stage our moderator for this panel, Mr. Tim Anderson, CEO, Sun Cable Indonesia. Our applause, please, for our moderator, ladies and gentlemen. And also, we'd like to kindly invite our esteemed speakers, Bapak Ahmad Fazri, Director of Finance at MindID. We kindly invite Ms. Jeannie Tan, Chief Commercial Officer of DP World. And also, we'd like to kindly invite Mr. Sang-Hon Yoon, Vice President, Head of Future Business Group, Hyundai Motor ASEAN Headquarters. Mr. Tim Anderson, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Good morning and have a seat, thank you. No pressure following two world leaders and just before lunch, so we will need to keep this very focused and back to business. I think we can hear the vision from our leaders, but now we need to get back and solve the world's problems in the real world. So it's great privilege to have with us three distinguished guests who will bring some perspectives around solving and reflecting on global supply chains, particularly as it relates to the ASEAN region. So in no particular order, we have representing Indonesia, Ahmad, one of the finance directors from MindID, which is an exciting new initiative from the Indonesian government to downstream a bunch of industries, so we'll talk about that. And we have from DP World, COO Jeannie from Singapore. DP World we'll hear from her about international global player in supply chain logistics. And then Mr. Yoon, we are very privileged to have a senior representative from Hyundai talking about some of the issues faced in the ASEAN region. So the key topic today is green and resilient supply chains. So we want to talk and elaborate on that. We want to get to the focus on the key issues that are facing businesses and what are going to be the challenges and solutions to unlock further trade flows in the ASEAN region specifically. So let's start with painting the general picture. Maybe Jeannie, we could start with you. Maybe you could just explain a little bit about DP World and what your footprint is in ASEAN and your plans in that respect.
So DP World is an end-to-end logistics company. Our vision is to enable trade, and we are fully committed to...
Just check if your mic is green.
Sorry?
Green light.
What do I do with this one?
Is it green?
Nope.
Oh, it should be a green light. Bisa minta tolong dari teknisi untuk cek mic-nya ini? Bu Jeannie?
Can you hear me now?
Yeah, keep talking. So maybe while we're waiting for a little technical issues, Bu Jeannie, ibunya. Yeah.
Sorry for that. Testing. Okay.
Yeah.
So DP World is an end-to-end supply chain logistic company. Our vision is to enable trade. We want to bring cargoes to our customers from the factory floor to the customer's door. We're fully committed to provide sustainable logistic solutions to our customers.
Thank you, Jeannie. Maybe for Ahmad, could you like to explain a little bit about the vision and mission of MindID?
So MindID actually is a state-owned enterprise. It is a consolidating platform for mining asset and operation in Indonesia. we have cover 6 major metal and mining operation in Indonesia, which is Antam, Freeport, Bukit Asam, Inalum, Timah, and so on. So from the commodities portfolio, we have copper, gold, tin, manganese, and so on. So our mandate actually is for reserve ownership, and then downstreaming. It will be our priority in the next few years, and also strengthening ecosystem for electric vehicle ecosystem.
So if I understand correctly, you have a bunch of mining companies as part of your group, and you also, I think, have a downstream battery factory or operation. Is that IBC?
Yeah, including IBC. It is grand.
Yeah. So Mine ID is at the forefront of the downstreaming policy from Indonesia? Yeah, great. And Mr. Yun, Hyundai, I think we all know what Hyundai is anecdotally. You make cars and all sorts of things, but maybe you could explain a little bit about who Hyundai is in ASEAN.
Yeah, our strategy in Asia, I think we have to provide better green mobility like EV or hydrogen vehicle so that we can achieve carbon neutrality as planned. You know that we have been doing our best in many areas for establishing ecosystem. So I think this is our mission rather than a strategy in Asia.
Yeah. And at the moment, where do you have manufacturing of motor vehicles in ASEAN?
We have 4 different manufacturing plants in Asia, in Indonesia and Vietnam and Singapore and Malaysia. And we are building electric vehicle in Indonesia and Vietnam. We're going to try to expand the EV production in ASEAN region.
Great. So we have a context here of a downstreaming agent for the Indonesian government policy. We have a logistics provider, which is the glue and the connectivity between this, and we have a global player with increasing manufacturing footprint here in ASEAN. So what a distinguished audience to be able to unpick some of the challenges and perhaps future for green and resilient supply chains. So Jeannie, coming back to you, we know that COVID disrupted supply chains drastically, and there were disruptions and cost implications. Maybe you could paint a picture of what's the current state of supply chain industry post-COVID.
So there's a very big difference in the way customers look at supply chain pre and post-COVID. I think pre-COVID is about efficiency, is about cost, but post-COVID is about reliance, reliability, supply chain, sustainable kind of supply chain. So the focus of customers is definitely changed a lot in pre and post-COVID now.
Yeah, and I think you have a strategy which is a B2B strategy and a B2C strategy. How is that evolving in the post-COVID environment for you?
So DP World, we have a portfolio of port and terminals assets, over 90 of them globally, and that is still expanding. We also have a lot of landside logistics, which we actually can link the terminal to the landside logistics together. We also have an ocean freight supply within the company itself. So our strategy is to actually shorten the supply chain and provide visibility to the customers so that they can actually forecast and project better. And in terms of if there's any trade disruption, supply chain disruption, we are able to react faster and more efficiently.
Very interesting. And maybe Ahmad, we know that downstreaming is having an immediate impact on trade flow for Indonesia. I believe our nickel exports from Indonesia have jumped dramatically from $2 or $3 billion of essentially raw materials to $20 to $30 billion of semi-processed. Where do you see the potential for further downstreaming and the effect on increased trade exports from Indonesia from your members? Yeah. So what kind of growth do you expect to see in the downstreaming of your businesses?
So for the downstreaming, we will our priority in the next 5 years. So the ecosystem we have to build, develop EV ecosystem battery in Indonesia. We have quite diversified commodities to support the development of EV battery. We have nickel, and then we have copper. With the downstreaming and the improvement in processing in Indonesia, we expect the supply chains and to fulfill the demand of domestic, and also we can export some of the product globally.
Perfect. Maybe, Mr. Ewan, we know that in order to decarbonise, we need to have a lot more EVs on the road. What is your prediction in terms of the growth of EVs and the battery industry, particularly in ASEAN, as you see it?
Yeah, it's very difficult to forecast the EV demand because the EV demand is greatly affected by each country's policy and EV infrastructure. So many research companies are announcing very different forecasts, but overall, the ASEAN EV demand is expected to grow from 120,000 units in this year to about 400,000 units in 2030, which account for about 10% of total automobile demand. But I think the ASEAN EV market would grow faster than this forecast because many countries are trying to strengthen the EV policy.
Yeah. So around 120,000 units now, and you think that by 2030 at least we'll be hitting around 400,000 units of EVs being manufactured in ASEAN. So significant growth, but even more potentially if the governments implement policies to accelerate that. And I guess how can ASEAN feed its production to fulfill that demand, increasing supply of components and battery and other components?
Recently, the major automotive industrial countries in ASEAN, such as Indonesia and Thailand, the government have implemented many various policies to expand the EV market and to force their own EV industry. So considering this policy and import duty, it is expected that most of the EV demand in ASEAN would be supplied internally by ASEAN countries, and the volume of imported EV from outside the region would be very limited. And when it comes to localization, currently the major EV parts are assembled and imported and assembled in ASEAN countries. But as the EV demand increases, the localization rate in ASEAN and the cost competitiveness in ASEAN region will be improved. And then the export to Indo-Pacific region as well as the ASEAN region will be possible within a few years. That's why we are considering a battery cell plant in Indonesia.
Right. So what I'm hearing is that you believe that ASEAN has the capability, the products that can fulfill a large component of that manufacture. And as you say, as growth in demand, that will even make the manufacturing capacity and the supply chain to supply that manufacturing even become stronger in ASEAN. And so that's ASEAN, but I guess thinking more broadly around the Indo-Pacific, what can ASEAN do to collaborate with the broader ecosystem across the Indo-Pacific to develop the technology needed to promote that growth we talk about?
Yeah, to develop the EV industry, a certain size the EV market is needed, but currently the ASEAN EV market is still in the very early stage, so it will take some more time to get the economy of the scale. So I think the first task we have to focus on is to expand EV market. And expand EV market, the price of electric vehicle should be lowered because, which is very expensive than the internal combustion engine. So the financial incentive implemented in many countries would be very helpful. But in addition to this incentive, the collaboration between countries in ASEAN and in the Pacific region would be very helpful. First, I think it's the area where collaboration is needed is import tariff. and the localization and technology standard. In short term, minimize the import tariff on the electric vehicle parts and resources can help EV makers supply more affordable EV into the market. But however, at the same time, the localization should be carried out gradually because localization reduces the manufacturing cost and reduce the logistics cost in long term. So both of the minimizing tariff and the localization EV part in ASEAN region and need is collaboration between ASEAN and Indo-Pacific. And when it comes to technology standardization, so the government, the cooperation between government in this region needed to unify the EV technology standard. So because standardization can minimize the investment cost in infrastructure. Also, it can use the resource efficiently. So for example, we can think about the same charging standard in this region.
Right. So I'm hearing clear messaging from a major industrial group that the policies do matter. Tariff settings and to drive the uptake or increased uptake or decreased uptake, I guess, of EVs is a significant factor. And I guess also I'm hearing that the supply chain connections between ASEAN and other key parts of the supply chain are very important drivers you see in terms of driving that future growth. Thank you, Mr. Ewan. Maybe coming back to you, Jeannie, you have this global perspective and you obviously a very strong Asia-Pacific integrated operation. So, I mean, supply chain resilience, what does that mean for your business, and what are you seeing, I guess, your customers asking for in terms of solutions that deliver that supply chain resilience?
So sustainability of the supply chain is in DP World's DNA. We invest a lot in the future. So to us, our eye is high. So our customers nowadays, when they want to do business with DP World, it's very common that we see big conglomerates, they will ask for our sustainability policies and our approach, how we're going to commit and contribute to that part of the world. So I think in terms of, like Mr. Woon said, on the EV part, on the logistic chain, DP World can play a very instrumental kind of position, especially in ASEAN, where we actually operate about 18 ports and terminals across ASEAN now, and this number will continue to grow. We will actually, like I said, reduce the supply chain so that there's lesser carbon emissions, replace land transport with water-to-water connection. So instead of, for example, one container on one truck, if you can do it by barge, you can actually have 100 containers on one barge. So that will actually cut down on carbon emissions too. So this is something that is more sustainable, instead of relying on just the trucks, the labor, which is easily impacted, by weather, by labor supply, etc.
Right, so really addressing the ESG needs of your customers by having a very ambitious plan yourself as a business to decarbonize and make sure that you're as carbon neutral as quickly as possible, yeah? And mine ID, you're downstreaming, you're increasing the processing of some of the products from your mining groups. That sounds like it's going to need a lot of energy. So in a sustainability and decarbonization world that we live in, what's the plan in terms of decarbonizing your downstreaming in terms of energy sources?
So Mine ID currently adopting International Council Mining and Metal. So we expect that we will be qualified in the next 2 years. So we're trying our process, business practices, comply with international standard. From decarbonization perspective, we also closely monitor all of the operation in our subsidiary. So we expect we can decrease around 25% in the next 5 years to 10 years. So that's our commitment to in ESG perspective.
So that's great. You've got a clear ESG strategy. Are your customers or your customers' customers asking that you have a greener supply chain, so your energy sources for your downstreaming have to be renewable, or is there some flexibility with your customers at the moment?
Some customers require the standard green activity, but some not yet required. So, but in the long run, we will pursue to meet the global standard in our mining practices and our production. So we expect that we can commit with the Paris Agreement and more friendly to the environment.
Yeah, and we know Indonesia has a fantastic abundance of renewable energy resources, hydro, geothermal, solar. To what extent is Mine ID driving a discussion about demanding renewable energy to supply some of your downstreaming manufacturing?
So some part of our subsidiary use hydro power actually. So we expect that we can utilize the resources for the operation of another subsidiary, so we can consolidate or integrate some our production in the some area that we expect with efficient costs.
Very good. Maybe back to you, Jeannie. I mean, what are you seeing some of the biggest barriers for the adoption of green solutions with some of your customers or the supply chains that you're engaged with?
I beg your pardon, sorry?
So what are you seeing as some of the biggest barriers? You can have a strategy. Strategy can be very ambitious. It's all about implementation at the end of the day. And so I guess what are you seeing as some of the barriers or the challenges to implementing those green or ESG ambitions?
I think like also Mr. Woon mentioned, the different policies in different countries, non-standardization. There are other challenges which include cost implementation, because cost implementation for eco-friendly, sustainable solutions is usually higher than the traditional alternative. So we have to actually overcome that. We invest a lot in collaboration with big companies who share the same vision, so that we can actually defray the upfront cost. The other challenges we may have is in ASEAN, in Pacific Indo, we actually have a lot of climate issues too that we need to handle, and some of them are beyond us. So these are some of the challenges that we face, when it comes to implementing all this.
Right. And Mr. Yun, at Hyundai, you, I think, have a strategy to integrate sustainability into your business. I mean, what's your overall plan in terms of sustainability?
Okay, yeah. Taking the example from electric vehicle batteries, there are concerns about supply shortage during the rapid growth period of electric vehicle, and there are also concerns about the depletion of raw material for the battery. So considering these concerns, yeah, the battery reuse and recycling is becoming more essential. That's why we are proactively researching the technology related to battery reuse and recycle. And I think, yeah, in addition to this, with this technology, we have to make the closed life cycle for the battery, which is collecting the battery from the scrapped EV and recycling waste batteries and bring it back to the new battery production. Then we can make a circulation, and circulation can make sustainability. And I have another story about the recycling. Yeah, there is the waste plastic, and we melted this plastic and the product thread or strings from this melted plastic, and we use this string or thread to make a tool pouch. And you can see this tool pouch in Hyundai, Creta, and Stargazer. Currently, we are producing in Indonesia. So like that, we have planned to expand this application to the other part. So I think, yeah, this is the main, very important strategy for the sustainability.
Yeah, so very clear, and I mean that addresses one of the, I guess, main concerns with EV adoption and greater adoption of that technology, that it has a byproduct of waste that unless there's a plan or a strategy like you elaborate of upcycling used batteries and using some of those other packaging materials into other things. So very clear strategy, and we applaud you for that. Back to you, Ahmad. Are you seeing, you talked a little bit about ESG before, are you seeing any particular movement from any of your overseas customers around requiring you to have even stricter ESG, or what are you seeing from what are your customers overseas telling you about what requirements you need for ESG in your business?
Yeah, ESG is currently a hot topic from the activity and then financing requirement. All of investor lender also require more sustainability activity in our operation, and then some part of the world require a stricter rule about ESG activity in our mining operation. So that's why we try to commit with international standard and improve our initiative to comply with the standard of ESG global.
Got you. And maybe Jeannie, I mean, what is your understanding of the total trade flow that ASEAN represents in the Asia Pacific at the moment? What's the kind of percentage of overall volume that we're seeing in this region?
So we operate across 18 ports and terminals in ASEAN now, and like I said, we are going to grow and expand that. So in June this year itself, we are now, with the partnership of the Indonesian Investment Authority, we announced that we're going to manage and operate the Belawan new container terminal. We will put in our knowledge and expertise to actually increase the efficiency and also improve the logistics and port sector for Indonesia. We will increase it from the current 600,000 TEU capacity to 1.4 million TEU capacity. Our plan is to actually grow this Belawan terminal, a port, to be one of the hub for Indonesia and for us in Southeast Asia. And riding on that, the total projection that we have for the expenditure is about $7.5 billion US. All this will be used to improve the logistics efficiency, reduce the logistics cost, and also convert, as in, transform Indonesia as one of the key places that we want to participate in ASEAN.
Interesting. And as we've come out of this post-COVID disrupted supply chain, I suppose businesses around the region, around the world are thinking about, well, how can we avoid such a big impact in terms of supply chain disruptions? I mean, from your perspective, the DP World perspective, what are you doing to try and anticipate? And I guess what are your thoughts on what might be the kind of category of disruptions in the future? And I guess secondly, how are you planning to mitigate, so if those shocks do occur, your business is in a better way, better position to kind of mitigate that for your customers?
So we always talk to stakeholders, our partners and our customers on how we can actually improve supply chain resilience. One of the things that we've been constantly doing is digitalization and also tapping on new technologies to increase efficiencies so that there's lesser manual work being done, there's higher accuracy, lesser errors, lesser mistake, and of course lesser reliance on label or manual work to be done.
Right, and I believe, if I'm not mistaken, DP World has a shipping division, so you have ships, so you're integrated in terms of all aspects of that, and you have inland container facilities as well as fulfillment centres. So maybe you could just share a little bit about what does that give you in terms of an integrated business that helps, I guess, de-risk some of those supply chain risks?
So in DP World, we operate 4 pillars. The first one is the port and terminals that I think a lot of people are very well aware of. And then we have the logistics pillar. We have the marine services pillar, where we actually operate vessels but in the region. We do not do trans-Pacific trade or transatlantic trade. It's within Europe itself and intra-Asia, in the Middle East, Africa, and India. And we also have the economic zone and the industrial parks. So when we stitch the 4 together, it's really an end-to-end supply chain. So you can keep that one container or one container of cargo all within our assets. So we have better control, we create more stickiness, and lesser reliance on having to, for our customers, lesser reliance on having to work with 10 vendors in order to transport one container from A to B. We're able to be that one source, one solution.
Right, very interesting. So maybe, Ahmad, in the mining operations that you represent, you've got a suite of different mining companies. To what extent are new technologies, decarbonised technology, maybe EVs of heavy machinery, starting to be used by your member shareholders?
So, in terms of technology, we invite corporations from other countries to improve our operation. For IBC, we have from China to build partnership in Indonesia, and then in some area also we have collaborate with other company to improve our capability in technology. So in terms of technology, we try to invite other company to partner, to build partnerships in Indonesia.
Fantastic. And I suppose, given we've covered a bit of at a business level, let's maybe just talk a little bit about the policy settings and support. We heard from Hyundai suggesting that the right policy settings around low tariffs or no tariffs or incentives to uptake in the EV will have a significant impact on the uptake of vehicles there. I guess thinking more broadly around what kind of trade settings or policies ideally should we be wanting from at an ASEAN level to basically promote further growth? Maybe starting with you, Jenny, what are your thoughts in terms of what can governments and the ASEAN collective do to further enhance those trade flows? Jenny?
Sorry, I missed that.
Yeah, so if we're thinking about the policy level, and what can the governments and or ASEAN do to facilitate even more encouraging trade policies to improve the flow of goods and services across ASEAN?
Yeah, I think the countries in ASEAN will have to really be committed and work together to develop new policies. And the fact that there are still trade disputes or trade bans, this is something that we need to lend a lot of weight on so that we have a more stable, economic kind of thing within ASEAN. So this is something that we hope that ASEAN can do, and we are definitely there to be committed, to support in this case.
Yeah. Maybe for Ahmad, for you at MineID, I mean, obviously you are a beneficiary, you are a product of the downstreaming policy of Indonesia, where we take raw extracted minerals and process them. I mean, at an ASEAN level, what policies or initiatives would you like to see at ASEAN which would help your business even more?
So I think that the government should be encourage the activity. In Indonesia, recently, Financial Services Authority just released carbon trading regulation. Maybe soon will be implemented. Something like government intervention, provide incentive, or this incentive will accelerate the goals that we.
Very good. All right. I think we've covered some really interesting topics, of course, of this discussion. I mean, as we start to think about wrapping up the session, I mean, what would be one takeaway you'd like the audience to be left with in terms of a key point from each of your perspectives around what can be done to further enhance both a green and a resilient supply chain? So just maybe a closing comment, 1 or 2 minutes, I guess, from each of you, just around what would you like to see done in the broad sense of market and policy settings, I guess, to improve that green and resilient supply chain. So maybe, Ahmad, if you'd like to start, and then we'll work down one by one. I guess closing remarks, downstreaming, it seems to be working, but what would you like to see?
So Indonesia have rich in natural resources. So we will utilize our natural resources for build one of our mandate is strengthening EV battery ecosystem. So we will utilize, exploit our resources from downstreaming and then build capability to support EV battery ecosystem.
Right. So acceleration of the downstreaming is what I'm hearing from you. Maybe Jenny, what are your kind of parting thoughts on this topic, and where do you see the future?
So sustainability, I think, is everybody's responsibility. Big companies like ourselves and over here, we are fully committed. So whether it's investment in technology, investment in hours, in efforts to reduce carbon emission. So that includes like using eco-friendly EVs, in our port and terminals, or technologies on, like, for example, we have box bay, which is a high bay container storage. So automation, reduce unproductive vehicle move within the yards. So basically fully committed, and to accelerate to meet our target of net zero by 2050.
Right. And Mr. Yun, from Hyundai's perspective, what are your last thoughts or reflections on this particular topic?
Yeah, as I mentioned earlier, I think the first task we have to focus on is to expand the EV market. And in order to expand the EV market, the collaboration between ASEAN countries is important. For example, if there is a policy only for the one country, then it can make a block the trade of electric vehicles. So I think collaboration between the ASEAN countries will be very helpful for us.
Thank you very much. So, ladies and gentlemen, we've heard some really interesting insights, and I just like to try and capture those before we close out the session. So, we've been trying to explore and unpick, I guess, the state of the market at the moment around where trade flows are and how they're impacted by ESG and the impact of strategies are related to green and resilient supply chains. So I guess we can pull out a few themes that have been nicely described by our panelists. So it sounds like to me that ASEAN is back in terms of fundamental trade flows seem to be back on pre-COVID levels. Secondly, we're hearing from all of the panelists that each in their own way, their companies and corporations they represent, have very, very clear ESG and decarbonisation goals. I think that's a positive. We've also heard that policy settings at an individual government and a regional government are very important, and in the context of EVs uptake and the supply chain, vertically supply chain, we've heard from speakers that confirm that those policies do have an impact. And so the ability that incentives in individual markets, the ease of which the supply chains can bring components at low or no tariffs, those things we've heard really do matter in terms of accelerating the green part of the supply chain. I guess in terms of resilience, we've heard the strategy from DP World. We've heard their business, which is so integrated these days. It's not just, we're not talking about ocean-facing ports. We're talking about a whole variety of assets, and each component of the transport and logistics from point to point is now part of an integrated solution. And that provides a real assurance to customers that the shocks that may have previously existed where a pinch point in the supply chain might result in a significant increase in cost or constraints around supply. Companies such as DP World going very deep and vertical as a way to future-proof. So I'm getting a sense of optimism. I think hearing the projections around the growth of EV uptake in ASEAN, and the optimism that, in fact, with a few slight changes in policies, that could be even accelerated more. I think that's the incentive for politicians and the system to be able to encourage even more. I mean, we're talking about 3 times, 4 times growth of EV manufacture and supply in ASEAN from factories like Hyundai across the 4 countries that you're manufacturing. I think it's encouraging from the Indonesian side to see the success of your downstreaming, adding value, along with a commitment to do that with strong ESG values. So I think overall, we can face this issue, which has been, I mean, most economies, the logistics costs are a significant proportion of GDP. We know that. Indonesia, typically, some years, the costs of logistics equal over 30% of GDP. It's a massive amount of large economies. And so I thank you, panelists, for sharing some of the insights, both from your corporate perspective, but also, frankly speaking, on some of the things that we can ask governments and policymakers to do. And I think we can all have some optimism that going forward, we can have confidence that our supply chains will be increasingly lower carbon, the values of ESG implemented in a way that meets both your corporate objectives, but more importantly, the objectives of your customers and broader society. So I think we can conclude that we should have an air of optimism around supply chains, and the size of the market and the extent which manufacture of EVs, for example, can be fulfilled within the ASEAN region is real cause for optimism. So on that note, I'd like to thank the panelists, if you could join with me in thanking the speakers for sharing their time and their thoughts. And I also thank you for your attention and look forward to being able to share and discuss these topics further. Terima kasih banyak and selamat siang.
Distinguished delegates, ladies and gentlemen, once again, can we have a round of applause, please, for our panelist, our moderator, Mr. Tim Anderson, for conducting the second panel discussion, and also our distinguished speakers. Thank you very much. Yes, please return to your seats. Thank you very much. Distinguished delegates, ladies and gentlemen, before we continue to our next agenda, we would like to thank you to our sponsors, Bank Rakyat Indonesia, Pertamina, PT PLN Persero, Bank Negara Indonesia, Bank Mandiri, Mind ID, Telkom Indonesia, InJourney, Eriang, British Chamber of Commerce Indonesia, Google, Indonesian Business Council, PT Sun Cable Indonesia, Standard Chartered, ASEAN Food and Beverages Alliance. And also, we'd like to thank you for your support by ASEAN Center for Biodiversity, Canada ASEAN Business Council, European Union Delegation to ASEAN, Google Arts and Culture, Lembaga Penjamin Simpanan, ROK Mission, U.S. ASEAN Business Council, and World Intellectual Property Organization. And also thank you to ADB, Amazon, Bloomberg Neff, Booking.com, Coca, Netflix, TELUS, and Zoom, who had been supporting our event, ASEAN Indo-Pacific Forum, implementation of the ASEAN Outlook on the Indo-Pacific. So to all our distinguished delegates, ladies and gentlemen, once again, we kindly thank you for your time and attendance for the ASEAN Indo-Pacific Forum Day 2. And momentarily, we will commence the last panel for Sub-Theme 1. And also, ladies and gentlemen, and also our distinguished delegates and all participants, once again, we'd like to also remind you to please keep seated and also to ensure that all your mobile device or any telecommunication device to be switched on your ringtone to silent or vibrate mode. We'll begin in momentarily with our last panel of Sub-Theme 1. And ladies and gentlemen, as promised, we'd like to commence our last panel for Sub-Theme 1, and this panel will discuss addressing energy trilemma, balancing energy security, affordability, and sustainability. With that said, we would like to kindly invite on stage our moderator. It is our honor to invite Ms. Caroline Chua of Bloomberg News. Can we have an applause, please, ladies and gentlemen, for our moderator for the last panel? And also, we'd like to kindly invite our distinguished speaker, Bapak Dermawan Prasojo, CEO of PLN. Mohon izin Bapak, terima kasih. We'd like to kindly invite Ms. Kathy Wu, Regional President APAC of BP. We'd like to also invite Ms. Eno Ebong, Director of U.S. Trade and Development Agency. And last but never the least, we'd like to invite Mr. Goldie Hyder, CEO of Canada Business Council. Mrs. Carolyn Chua, you may proceed. The floor is yours.
Thank you. Good morning. Selamat pagi. It's great to be here, and thank you all panelists for taking time to join us today. So we don't have a lot of time, but this is a really important topic and lots to discuss. So I'd like to jump straight in, and just to check if you can hear me okay. Can you hear?
That's very faint.
It's very faint. It's a bit faint. I'll try to speak up and see if that works. So as the energy demand grows in Southeast Asia because of economic growth, rising population, but we are now also balancing the commitment to climate net zero targets. The energy trilemma looks set to increase. It's going to be very difficult to balance power demand with security, affordability, and sustainability. So I'd like to open the discussion with a question to all of our panelists. How do you think ASEAN is faring in terms of addressing the energy trilemma? So Pak Damawan, if we could start with you, please.
Well, first thing is the Earth is warming. And the future of the next generation might be compromised. So we need to reduce greenhouse gas emission. And I'm here to announce that PLN is the National Electric Company of Indonesia, is fully committed exactly to do so. You know. But in the same time, the growth of economic is very rapid. The additional demand is also very high. How are we going to be able to balance between growth and sustainability? And let me share with you, in the past, when we're talking about cheap energy, it's dirty. But let me share with you also that humankind innovates. The price of renewable energy is going down because of innovation year by year, month by month, week by week, day by day. When I auctioned solar in 2015, it's 26 cents per kilowatt hour. When I auctioned wind in 2018, it was 12 cents per hour, per kilowatt hour. Today, solar is 5 cents, wind is only 5.5 cents. So today, when we're talking about clean energy, it's cheap. When we're talking about cheap energy, it's clean. Yes, there's a trilemma. Affordability, security, and sustainability. In the past, it's a multiple conflicting goals. But with this kind of humankind innovations, it's going to reach what we call the convergence. In that regard, I still believe that humankind always prevail with that kind of innovation. And this is the case with Indonesia. How are we going to walk the talk? 2 years ago, we already removed 13 gigawatt of coal in the planning phase. That's avoiding 1.8 billion metric tons of CO2 greenhouse gas emission in the span of 25 years. Is it enough? No, it's not enough. We remove 1.1 gigawatt of coal and replacing it directly with renewable energy running as a baseload. Is it enough? No, it's not enough. We devised the greenest national electricity planning in the history of Indonesia 2 years ago. The additional generation capacity, 51% is coming from renewable energy. Is it enough? No, it's not enough. We already launched a net zero emission by 2060. Where do we go from here today? Is it enough? No. We are in the process of devising, designing, redesign the national electricity planning. With the new one, we understand there is a mismatch between the large-scale sources of renewable energy located in those remote areas, scattered, mismatched with the epicenter of demand. We need to build the green enabling transmission line. In the past, when we're talking about the base load, is coming from coal, 5-6 cents per kilowatt hour. In the past, wind and solar is roughly 11-12 cents. So adding solar and wind at that time is actually to drive the cost up, increase the price of electricity. How about today? There is a new presidential regulations actually stipulating that we're not going to be able to design and build any more coal. So the baseload generation capacity, the new one is coming from gas-fired power plants, hydro and geothermal. When we auction it, it's roughly 9 until 11 cents per kilowatt hour. Price is going to increase. But today, wind and solar, when we auction it, it's only 5 until 6 cents per kilowatt hour. So in the past, adding solar and wind is going to increase the price. But today, adding solar and wind is going to reduce the cost of electricity. That's why we are in the process right now designing and building a smart grid with flexible generation, smart transmission, smart dispatch center, smart distribution, smart meter. With this kind of fashion in which we're treating this as a challenge, yes, but also we're treating this as an opportunity. How we're going to grow. With this new kind of a planning, we are able to add additional 32 gigawatt of renewable energy as a baseload with this kind of a green enabling transmission line. With this newer smart grid, we are able to add previously only 5 gigawatt of variable renewable energy, solar and wind, to become 28 gigawatt of variable renewable energy. In that regard, I'm very optimistic here. Yes, the challenge is huge, but we have a conviction with this kind of a shifting from previously fragmented global communities to become unified with this kind of forum is giving us a sense of pride. No matter the challenge ahead, we're going to keep moving forward. Thank you.
Thanks. Thanks, Damawan. And I think you mentioned about infrastructure and the grid, and I'd like to come back to that. But Kathy, if we could move to you.
Yeah. Can you hear me okay?
No, I think, could we do a mic check for Kathy, please? Can you try again, maybe?
Good mics.
Do you want to try again?
Can you hear me okay? No. My mic is not on. Or, can you guys hear me?
Yeah.
Okay. All right. Great. Thank you. Good morning, everyone. So we see there is strong commitment from the ASEAN governments to Hello? Yeah. Much better. Yeah, thank you. So we see very strong commitment from the ASEAN governments to make sure this energy transition, which is a very complex problem, to be achieved in a sustainable way through collaboration, through building up connectivity, and in an orderly and just way. So ASEAN, we see ASEAN has a huge role to play and has a bright future. We see this energy trilemma needs to be responded in a and strategy, which means at BP we're investing in what the world needs today in terms of energy system, which is still primarily hydrocarbons. At the same time, spend money, investments to build our energy transition for the future. And we need all of those, not just one single source of energy, because of the enormity of the challenges. And we believe strongly that natural gas, because of its features serving as base load, is a very effective bridging fuel. But natural gas development itself is not enough. We need to bring CCS, which is carbon storage and utilization, to enable sustainable natural gas development. And BP, both from a corporate company standpoint and in Indonesia, we're exactly doing that. And I'm happy to share a bit later.
And
Thank you so much, and good morning, everyone. And I'd just like to quickly thank the organizers, the government of Indonesia, the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, for gathering us all for these very important discussions. So from our perspective, and I should say very briefly, I represent the U.S. Trade and Development Agency, which is a U.S. government agency that's focused on supporting the development of high-quality infrastructure, and at the same time bringing solutions, technologies, innovations that the U.S. has to offer. So I say that by way of prefacing that everything almost that I will say today is coming from that very pragmatic point of view of preparing projects for implementation, for financing, and for sustainability in the end. So from our perspective, ASEAN is really looking at how to address many of the challenges that we face in this transition in focusing on clean energy. ASEAN is focusing both on a collective level and also in individual countries as well. And in that focus, it is very much an understanding of what will it take in terms of preparing projects that can actually be implemented. For the benefit of the region, for example, we are looking at regional sort of interconnectedness projects. And that's very important to focus on the how, the details. Similarly, with electric vehicles, which we hear a lot of, what does that actually mean? What are the policies? What are the recommendations that would be necessary to actually do this? So ASEAN is looking proactively at grappling with some of these very challenging issues. And I think that kind of direction is going to be critical if there's going to be success in facing the challenges. I'll leave it there for now.
Thank you. And Goldie?
Your question, Caroline, was how is ASEAN doing? And I suppose I could play to the audience and say you're doing a great job. You're doing all right. You've got the good intentions, great ideas, you're bringing down costs, and you're investing. I could lose the audience by saying, you're doing okay, but really not that great, because you continue to use a lot of coal in this region. Or I could say to you that, in fact, it doesn't matter. And you might be surprised. And I say that because carbon emissions, much like COVID, pay no respect to regions, pay no respect to borders, don't clear customs and immigration. They move around. So even if you were doing great, it doesn't matter, because we all need to do great. That's the first point I think we all have to recognize is we're truly in this together. And that means you have to be honest about the facts. And for too long, we have allowed the facts to get away from our narrative. So if it's already going to be, and believe me, this transition, first of all, it's a transition. Secondly, it's going to be really, really hard. There's nothing easy about this. It's going to be a mess. It's not a straight line. No matter the best of intentions, the best of will, it's going to be difficult. It's going to be very complicated. But you know what will make it more complicated? Is if we set aside the facts. And for too long, we've allowed sort of the louder voices, if you will, to set aside the facts. First fact, we're still going to need traditional fossil fuels. At least for the next 30 to 40 years, according to the OECD. You know those cars that we're taking off the roads to get you an electrical vehicle? We're not having a funeral for them and sticking them 6 feet underground. They're being sent somewhere else in the world to be used. They're still going to need gasoline. They're still going to need sources of energy that are traditional. We have to do a significantly better job in promoting the fact that we are not going to achieve net zero without nuclear. For too long, environmentalists, with all due respect, have said, we're going to do net zero without nuclear. Now, many of them have come to the realization that, in fact, nuclear, particularly the innovation that's being led in Canada, small modular nuclear reactors, are going to be a critical piece of helping organize our countries and businesses and society to reach their net zero targets. We're going to rely heavily on carbon capture, something else that environmentalists in particular have said, we don't need to do that. It encourages the creation of carbon. We are going to create carbon. We're breathing, we're alive, we move, we do things. Of course carbon's going to be created. We're going to have to capture it, and we're going to have to store it somewhere. We're going to have to figure out about something as complicated as hydrogen. We're all excited about green hydrogen, but it's going to take a lot of water. It's going to take a lot of electricity. It's going to take a lot of infrastructure. And so these are hard truths that I think we all have to come to grips with. And I'll stop there, but I just want to make sure that when we talk about the trilemma, we remember that a trilemma is supposed to be effectively 3 equal solutions to a complex problem. And I'd like to get into the discussion where I believe they're not equal, and that in fact the most important one amongst those 3 of energy security, sustainability, and affordability is the last one. Because we're only going to be able to move as far and as fast as our societies allow us to do. See Germany. Went too fast, too soon on renewables, and now they're running coal plants and had to go back to gas because the society couldn't afford the transition. So we have to be very conscious of the best of intentions here, can be pulled back very quickly in a society, irrespective of your form of government. We serve the people.
Right, thank you. And I'd like to come back to you. Goldie, you mentioned that we'll need a lot of infrastructure. Pak Damawan, you mentioned earlier that the conflict among the 3 aspects of energy trilemma may actually be easing. So, for example, affordability and sustainability don't have to be mutually exclusive today. And also, I'd like to get your views on that. Is it now possible to balance the energy trilemma? And given that we will need so much new infrastructure to get there, like, how do you see the role of USTDA in this?
Thank you for that. And I will admit, in a previous life, I was an attorney. And so I often answered questions about, is it possible with, it depends. But I actually want to go out on a limb today and say, yes, it is possible to balance it, and that view is formed by what I do now in the context of project preparation for infrastructure projects. Because I believe if you keep certain elements in mind, that you can approach the infrastructure of the future that is going to absolutely be addressing the challenges of transition and more, that you can do it in a balanced way. So, a couple of the elements that I would call to mind. Number one, I think we are all in this mindset of creating partnerships, and partnerships that are real, partnerships that look to cross the cross-section of what it needs to stand up infrastructure, whether it is technology providers, whether it is financiers, whether it is project preparers. This all has to be done in the mind of we have to do this in a way that works, taking various elements into mind. Policy and regulations are really critical in that as well. I would say that we also have to be willing to invest in innovative technologies. On the one hand, being willing to risk and test sort of completely new technologies is huge. On the other hand, you have to be willing to apply already existing technologies in an innovative way. I think that will get us a long way towards this balancing. Number three, I think you have to think about, and I almost use these interchangeably, access, i.e. affordability, from the beginning. When you're planning projects, think about who it is and how it is that women, that people in underserved communities, how is this going to impact them? And if you're thinking about that in the beginning, you're going to build something that is accessible and therefore affordable as well. I would say that you have to prioritize project preparation, obviously. I would say that, but it's actually critical to be able to get the financing that you need to be able to stand up these projects and to make sure that they're technically designed well. And then finally, I would say look at the ecosystem of what you're trying to accomplish. I'm going to pick out one subject in particular that doesn't seem that related to project preparation, but you need to keep in mind, and that is procurement. procurement of infrastructure. It is, it can make or break. And so thinking about how you procure, and in our view at USTDA, you do it in a way that takes into account the life cycle, that takes into account the value. And we've taken the time to educate procurement officials around the world on this subject. So those are the elements that I see, and because of that, I do think that you can approach this in a balanced way. You just have to think early, and you have to take into account the entire ecosystem of what will be necessary to accomplish your goals.
Thank you, and I think that's a great view. So it's a lot about preparation and embracing the newer technologies that could come in, but preparing the landscape for it now. So Kathy, if we could come to you. You mentioned a few technologies earlier that some may consider a little bit nascent and not yet at a commercial level that can be scaled up and deployed very widely, such as CCS. Could you share some of share more on some of these specific projects you're working on, how close, how far we are from commercially deploying these technologies?
So I think, first of all, to fix this problem of scale that we're facing in the world, we definitely need critical technology, new technology development, and new technology application. So in this space, collaboration between government, industry, and academia is a huge enabler. And the process we need to go through is to innovate, to come up with new ideas, to test them, to make them effective, that they do what they're supposed to do, reduce the cost, and to find actual applications where we can scale them up to achieve them, the massive effect, if you will. And it's not purely from a lab setting. A lot of these new technology applications are born from the practices the industry has been doing for decades. So one example, BP is investing significant amount of money in our Tangguh LNG. It's already the largest gas field in country, and we're building the CCUS capability to this. When the CO2 comes out of reservoir, we re-inject back, but that's only the foundational level. And there are a couple of new applications of this CO2 re-injection. Number one is we're using that to engage in enhanced gas recovery, and that application on an existing technology is the first in the world. I think secondly is the reservoir themselves are huge. In Tangguh, we have reservoir capacity of up to 1.8 gigatons. So from that standpoint, we would have the capacity to attract, to store CO2, not just from our Tangguh, our field, but from domestic emission sources and also international sources. We talked about infrastructure. Of course, there's physical infrastructure. I think there's also a policy, regulatory infrastructure that is hugely important. And over the last year, Indonesia government has been moving at a very fast pace to establish, to build the regulatory framework through the regulations and to enable the CCS, CCUS industry. The policy and the regulatory infrastructure is hugely enabling. And from BP's standpoint, we're very supportive, and we applaud the Indonesia government's leadership in this space and the collaboration with the industry.
Thank you, Kathy. And Pak Damawan, if I can come to you. So if we think now about the energy transition in the power sector, and as you mentioned earlier, the grid, we can't run away from the discussion around the grid, digitalizing it, smart grid, but also extending the grid out so that it could accommodate all the renewables that we hope to build. So be it the domestic grid here in Indonesia or the ASEAN power grid that has been widely discussed, could you share with us some of the challenges and perhaps what are the collaboration opportunities that people can work with you and together to help push that and drive that implementation sooner?
First, I want to say thank you to British Petroleum. Actually, we are the biggest customer, the anchor buyer of British Petroleum in Indonesia. And can you imagine this? And we are entering a critical phase of transition of energy. Why I'm calling it critical? Because it offers huge, tremendous challenges, but also magnificent opportunities. Challenges. We're talking about, when we're talking about gas-fired power plants, 1 gigawatt is only $500 million US. Hydro, 1 gigawatt is roughly $2 billion US. Geothermal, 1 gigawatt is $2.7 billion US. Capex investment, meaning that the investment is quadruple, meaning that's increasing huge amount of debt. But in the same time, also the operational cost, operational expenditure, the fuel cost of renewable energy is very low. So it's when we're talking about renewable energy as a base load, it's a front-loaded investment. The levelized cost of electricity is going to be roughly the same, but it's going to be amortized in the next 25 years. So the biggest challenge of the transition of energy is how we're going to be able to deploy large amount of capital. And of course, this kind of forum, the Asian Indo-Pacific Forum is giving us a sense of pride. Previously, fragmented global communities today becoming unified. With that kind of fighting spirit, we are very sure no matter the challenge ahead, we're going to be able to move forward. We're talking about collaboration of policy, collaboration of technology, collaboration of innovations, collaboration of co-investments. This is local, national, regional, and also international. And, about the Asian power grid. During the COVID-19, and we can see that the Asian regions has been enjoying a very strong resilience. Why? Because of collaborations. But when we're talking about the networks of energy, I think we are kind of left behind. We need to work on it. When we're talking about interconnected grid, it's actually offering secure, robust, sustainable supply of energy. But today, even in Indonesia, Sumatra and Java, the transmission is not connected. Kalimantan to Java is not connected. So that's why we are facing, like I presented before, a mismatch between the sources of large-scale base-load renewable energy, hydro and geothermal, in those remote areas with the location of epicentrum demand on the other part of the region in Java. So we need to build the green enabling transmission line. And the dream of the Asian power grid is actually reflecting the dream of how we're going to be able to grow together, providing robust supply of energy, much more reliable energy, but this also facing a lot of complexities. We have to navigate the complexities of the technical difficulties of building transmission line, the cross-border transmission line from Laos to Vietnam to Cambodia, to Malaysia, to Singapore, to Indonesia, the whole area. We have to navigate the complexities of how aligning some kind of different policies, how we're going to be able to come up with some kind of a commercial feasibilities. This is requiring large amount of investment. So we have to come up with a term in which there is a way to recover the investment back. How about we going to be able to map out every single risk, and each of the risks has to be addressed properly. And then the internal rate of return is going to be commercially feasible. And then also we're talking about legal complexity. So, but with this kind of forum, we understand the Asian power grid is not only about towers, it's not only about wires, it's not only about substations, but it's representing a new strength of Asia, reflecting the shift of previously fragmented ASEAN to become unified for one purpose of all, prosperity for the Asian region. Thank you.
Thank you. And I think, if I can come back to you, Pak Damawan has mentioned, some of the challenges like technical and harmonization of policies, if you're looking at interconnected grids around the region, will require a whole other discussion that we perhaps don't have the time for today. But I hope to at least address maybe some of the other challenges mentioned, like capital, how do we de-risk the projects? And USTDA has a lot of experience in that. Could you just perhaps share what are some of the factors that would make you comfortable to enter and invest in some of these infrastructure assets that's needed to push the energy transition?
Absolutely. I think it's such a critical question. And again, from our perspective as being engaged in that early stage of preparing projects, obviously bringing down, limiting the risk to potential investors. And because we are providing assistance through grant-based funding for technical assistance, feasibility studies, pilot projects, the kinds of things that are going to give that assurance to investors. It is very important for us to have our ducks in a row as to the criteria, the factors that will enable us to invest. And perhaps I'll answer the question by example, which is the fact that we have supported here in Indonesia the feasibility, looking at the technical assistance for setting up this first small modular reactor here. So this is looking at advanced nuclear, to Goldie's point earlier, technology, which, doesn't yet exist, but has gone a long way in terms of research and development. And so for an agency that, again, using taxpayer funds, but embracing the fact that we do have to take considered risk, then, how do we do that? So first, of course, is understanding the research, the analysis, what has gone into the product so far. For us, we're fortunate to have experts in our Department of Energy, in our Nuclear Regulatory Commission. So we are able to build on that expertise. We're able to understand the partners that we have who are knowledgeable in the field, who are in communication with our regulatory counterparts. That is important because the regulatory environment has to be developed at pace. And when a new technology, how do you do that? Well, you do that by engaging and sharing information and sharing knowledge. So that piece is something we very much look to in terms of the prospects for success. I would also say that it's important that we see a willingness, even if the sector isn't known, to build on knowledge that does exist, for the regulators to have an inclination to give us a sense that, okay, this will work. I have to, and I can't underscore enough, the technical acumen that we rely on. And this comes from the private sector. In this case, our partner here with the small modular reactor that we're looking at in West Kalimantan is Indonesia Power. They have selected a US firm, NewScale, to look at this possibility. But there's a range of partners here. There's a subsidiary from Texas-based Fluor, and there's a Japanese corporation, JGC. So it's a whole constellation of technical experts. It's critical to making sure that we're doing this in the right way. The last piece I will talk about is communication. And it begins early, and it's not just on the technical sense, it's not just capacity building in the technical part, but also with your population, with your communities, to really be able to explain what it is you're thinking about, what it is you're planning, and how and what the risks and impacts are.
Thank you. And Goldie, if I can come to you, you mentioned right at the start that we are all in this together, right? And I think one advantage of perhaps the ASEAN region is to be able to look at the best practices of what has happened in other countries and to be able to leapfrog the energy transition here. So could you share with us, what are some of the ways and initiatives in Canada that have helped to promote sustainable alternatives that also help to balance the energy trilemma that perhaps we could adopt here in the region?
Carbon tax. You want to incent the behavior you want. I mean, there's not many countries that have taken that approach, but a carbon tax is the most market-sensitive way to start changing behavior. The United States doesn't have it. Many other countries don't have it. It's going to be complicated as we start talking about carbon border adjustments and so forth. The communication, the education, the responsibility that governments and businesses and others have to bring the public with us, I think, is an important component of it. Look, this issue is the issue of our time. It is wrought with challenges, but it also creates opportunities. And there's no question that there are many of those. And I'm very proud as a Canadian that our government and the ASEAN governments have now brought in Canada as a strategic partner to the ASEAN. And I think it's a good moment where we can both benefit from what each of us can bring to the table. There's a lot of synergies here. We have what you need, you have what we need. We both have really smart people. We're both going to be much more aggressive and innovative in terms of dealing with the issues. But we have to be, again, back to my point about being honest about where we find ourselves. There are some systemic issues that we're going to deal with. One, if you ask me what's keeping many CEOs, not just in Canada, but many CEOs I interact with around the world up at night, the answer might surprise you. The answer is the decline of democracy. That it's becoming very difficult for capital to be deployed and form and achieve the purpose of deploying that in democracies. Now, I know in the ASEAN there are different forms of governments, but you know what? All democracies aren't the same, all communists aren't the same, all autocrats aren't the same, but capital is frankly neutral when it comes to an ideology. Capital is neutral when it comes to a nationality. Capital has an anthem. How do I make $1 too? I will go wherever it is to make $1 too. And if we're not careful, we're actually going to embolden some of the very societies that we're competing against. And so what do we need from those democracies? But not just democracies, all forms of government as businesses, because with all due respect, governments are only going to be able to spend so much. It's going to be largely, if not almost all of it, private sector led. Governments can enable, they can create incentives. Just for context, the IRA is about $400 billion, maybe $500 billion. It's estimated that all of today's global GDP, which is in the $135 trillion range, is going to be necessary to get to net zero by 2050. There's no way governments can pay for all of that. So they have to create the incentives for businesses to be able to lead on this transition. So what's holding us back? Number one, I would say to you, is policy certainty. We need policy predictability, permitting stability, permitting reform, where we know that if you follow the rules, it doesn't matter who's in power, because with all due respect, governments come and governments go. But businesses have to make investments for the long haul. Otherwise, we get stranded assets. We're going to be seeing a lot of that today. Right? We're being forced to strand our assets to develop new technology. But someone has to pay for all of that. And so policy predictability, policy certainty is a very, very big part of that. The second issue here is what we've discussed is about infrastructure. This is not sexy stuff, but you know what? If you're going to capture carbon, you're going to have to put it into a pipe. You're going to have to build that pipe to be able to store it in certain demographies and geographies that you can't just store it wherever. You have to have certain conditions to do that. And so people get in the way of the development of the infrastructure, then they're actually getting in the way of reducing emissions. And so we've got to connect infrastructure development to the achievement of our emissions goals. For now, it's seen as unnecessary. We don't need more infrastructure. The fact is, we need a lot more infrastructure. Third of 4 points. The third one is simply this. If you ask most people who have said they've made their 2050 commitments, they're going to get to net zero, if they're honest with you, they will tell you they don't know how. They will tell you that we figured out how to do 30%, maybe 40%, maybe 50%. Sure, there's some exceptions who figured out how to do it, okay? But the vast majority of them are banking on innovation to happen. We don't really know exactly how we're going to get there from here to there. And innovation requires patience. Most innovation is successful after failing. So we're going to do some things, we're going to fail, we're going to figure out how to do it better, and we're going to keep working at it. And that's where I think collaboration with ASEAN, with other regions in the world, is going to be so central to what we do. And then the fourth component of this, and I just want to repeat it one more time, because if there's a significant risk out there that will get in the way of the progress that we are trying to make and need to make on climate change, on reducing emissions, it is if we lose our publics. If we cannot bring society with us on the journey that we're going, they will slingshot you back into reality. I mean, it's very difficult in your country, the United States, where black becomes white or red becomes blue on day one of a new administration. An executive order can cancel a pipeline. An executive order can remove a carbon tax. An executive order can do all kinds of things. That will not be conducive to capital forming in your country. So you're incenting your way there, but how much of that can you really do in the long run? Right? And so we have to make sure that we're bringing our public with us on this journey and building the infrastructure that they need, particularly electricity grids, particularly cheaper energy such as small modular nuclear reactors, particularly hydrogen and other things which are not easy to do. They're complicated. And so we have to have a truth conversation with our society. Otherwise, we're talking amongst the elites here, we're talking amongst ourselves, and we will be reminded, as smart as we may all be, the public will decide how far we can go and how fast we can go.
Thank you. And I think we've been talking about the energy transition trilemma as to what's needed in terms of infrastructure as a necessary journey. But an emerging dimension of the energy transition is also about retaining or even enhancing country competitiveness, industrial competitiveness. So Kathy, if you could share with us briefly and quickly, how do you see these aspects now shaping businesses' decisions, countries' decisions about energy mix or investment decisions?
Yeah. So I think in terms of increasing countries' competitiveness is not a new topic. And of course, the agenda in terms of energy transition, because of the magnitude where the amount of investments are needed, Bloomberg talked about 7 trillion per year being needed for us, for the world, to reach net zero between now and 2050, the need for technology, the need for collaboration, that puts the country competitiveness in the new light. On one hand, we do need to collaborate. At the same time, each country really presents the ability to attract capital. I think from an industry participant standpoint, we look at several factors, if you will. First is really the demand that drives a lot of potential, the supply potential, and the technology needed, how mature, would we be able to decrease the cost and increase the reliability so it's scalable. And the infrastructure that I talked about, not just the physical infrastructure, but also the policy infrastructure. And to compete for investments globally. BP has a global portfolio. All of the projects need to meet the hurdle rate. And we look at those factors, the supply, the demand, the infrastructure, the technology, and how stable it is that our projects would be able to survive and be successful for many years because of the long cycle of these projects. I think also innovation and how a country, government is welcoming the new development. BP is exploring low carbon energy opportunities within ASEAN, and Indonesia is very gifted with a lot of geothermal, solar, all sources of new energy, and how can we forge new relationships to make our projects economic, establish the commerciality as the first step, and gradually, steadily scale up so then they can be sustainable over the long term. And we cannot do it alone. That's why collaborating with our national partners, with other IOCs, is critical factor to success.
Thank you. And I think the keywords that we've been hearing a lot is collaboration, preparation, and investing in infrastructure to get us there. We only have a couple of minutes left on the clock, so I'd like to shoot a fire round question to all the panelists to close this out. Can Indonesia achieve net zero emissions by 2060 while maintaining global economic competitiveness? Goldie?
Yes is the answer, but we've all discussed how, and that's the hard part here, is we need the leadership, we need the will, we need the capital, we need the innovative capacity to do so.
I would also say yes, but let's not let the moment that we are in pass us by.
we have reached a level of awareness that I don't think can be peeled back in terms of the importance of these issues, in terms of the collectiveness in which we are talking about these issues. And I think that that cannot be underestimated, but it's incumbent on all of us from our perspectives, including where we have the ability to facilitate and bring together parties that can act here, to act, to keep moving the ball forward, even within the vicissitudes of political change, because we have come quite far in a short time, and we have to make sure that we continue forward. Thank you.
Thank you. Kathy?
So I would say definitely visa. I think from our standpoint, Indonesia is a very important country in our global portfolio. We've been here for more than 50 years, and we would like to contribute to the long-term sustainable energy security and energy transition agenda the country has. Going back to what I said earlier, the end is very, very important. These things do not happen overnight and full of challenges. So we need to invest in the energy systems the world needs today. We also need to start investing in innovating for what the world will need tomorrow. So we need all of them. And I also wanted to say that each country, each region, the economic circumstances are different. The path to transition is different. And we need to look into the actual situation, the need to figure out the how. That's really the challenging piece. But BP is very committed to supporting ASEAN community, supporting Indonesia to reach our goals.
Thank you. And Pak Damawan?
Yes, we need to make sure that the future of the next generation should be better than ours. And we are fully committed exactly to do so. And we're doing this not only because of international environmental agreement, not only because of policy. We do this because we really care. How are we going to walk the talk? I think yes, we can. We're going to be able to achieve net zero emission by 2060. But we need to get the right policy, regulatory framework in place. We need to design an ecosystem that is conducive for green investment. We need to come up with some kind of collaboration of policy, technology, innovations, co-investment in every single sense. We're not going to be able to bear the burden alone. And PLN here, we're giving the best we can. And in the past, our main job was to provide electricity. But in the future, our main job is to take care of the environment, while electricity is our byproduct. Thank you.
Thank you. And I love the sense of optimism, right? And I think we all acknowledge that there's still a lot of work to be done, but let us also look back at the past few years, and we have seen that the momentum has remained so strong for Indonesia, for PLN, and let us, let that encourage us to continue exploring the collaboration partnerships that we need to move even further on. So thank you. Please join me in thanking my panelists today.
Thank you very much to Ms. Caroline Chua and also to our distinguished speakers for the last panel discussion for our sub-theme 1. And ladies and gentlemen, we had to conclude the Green Infrastructure and Resilient Supply Chain sub-theme. And as of right now, we'd like to inform you it is time for a lunch break. Lunch have been prepared for you at the lobby floor, and also a Standard Chartered is conducting its luncheon called Standard Chartered ASEAN Indo-Pacific Luncheon, accelerating a just transition to net zero in ASEAN at Cascade Lounge. We'd like to also inform you, distinguished delegates, ladies and gentlemen, that our sub-theme 2, Sustainable and Innovative Financing, will begin at 2 p.m. local time in this ballroom. Therefore, please make your way back to the premises, to the ballroom at 1:50 p.m. local time. And we still have a lot of prominent speakers and also interesting discussion in our second half of ASEAN Indo-Pacific Forum right here at the Mulia Hotel, Jakarta. With that said, have a great lunch to all our distinguished delegates, ladies and gentlemen. We'll see you at 2.
is a large state-owned enterprise that focuses on the MSME segment. BRI Digital Innovation continues to be carried out to facilitate customers in providing services to continue to give value to Indonesia. BRI is a large state-owned enterprise that focuses on the MSME segment. BRI Digital Innovation continues to be carried out to facilitate customers in providing services to continue to give value to Indonesia.
BNI harus semakin proaktif dan responsif.
BNI terus konsisten untuk mendorong UMKM kita naik kelas.
BNI berkomitmen dalam program-program pemberdayaan UMKM untuk go global.
In Bank Mandiri, we are already one step forward, pioneering Indonesia's transition to low-carbon economy by pursuing net zero emissions on operational by 2030. Let's put our hands together to create a brighter future.
Mining Industry Indonesia, Mind ID, we explore natural resources for civilization, prosperity, and a brighter future.
BRI is a large state-owned enterprise that focuses on the MSME segment. BRI Digital Innovation continues to be carried out to facilitate customers.
Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Shalom, Om Swastiastu, Namo Buddhaya, Salam Kebajikan. Very good morning, His Excellency Mr. Febrio Kacaribu, Chairman